Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Louisiana Board of Elementary and Secondary Education Superintendents Advisory Council. Today is Monday, May 23rd, 2022. Agenda item 1, opening, roll call.
Mr. Alexander has a proxy, Dr. Walker. Mr. Burkus.
Here.
Dr. Coker.
Here.
Mr. Corley has a proxy, Mr. Downing.
Here.
Mr. DeVilliers.
Here.
Dr. Fountain is excused, Dr. Gloria is excused, Dr. Gray.
Here.
Mr. Javia.
Here.
Mr. Jenkins.
Here.
Dr. Joffrion.
Here.
Mr. Jones.
Here.
Dr. Joseph.
Here.
Ms. Laviolette.
Here.
Dr. Lewis has a proxy, Ms. Garten. Here. Dr. Narcisse. Not in attendance. Dr. Ortley.
Here.
Mr. Powell.
Present.
Ms. Tanner.
Here.
Mr. Watts.
Here.
And Mr. Williams.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Agenda item 1.2, recognition of guests. We're all aware that the legislature is currently in session. Do we have any senators or representatives who are present today? We'd like to recognize and acknowledge you at this time. We do have DESA members, Doris Boucher and Ronnie Morris with us today. Thank you all for coming. As matters of housekeeping, please make sure that you pick up a green public comment card if you'd like to make public comments in reference to any of our agenda items. As well, council members, please speak into your microphones so that the public will be able to hear you clearly. Agenda item 2.1, approval of minutes from the March 24, 2022 meeting. Do I have a motion?
I make the motion. Second.
Motion by Superintendent Williams, second by Superintendent Vallier. Questions or comments from the council? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. New business, agenda item 3.1, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 136, Louisiana Standards of Early Childhood Care and Education Programs serving children with birth to 5 years regarding early learning development standards. Motion to receive.
Motion.
Motion made by Superintendent Joffrion, second by Superintendent Jenkins. Superintendent Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Good morning, everyone. Glad to see you all here, and hopefully you will find some time this summer to disconnect a little bit. It's been another tough year, but you guys have handled it well, and I'm appreciative for each one of you, and know that across the state we'll have some great summer programs taking place to help with learning recovery and acceleration. So hope to have an opportunity to come out and see some of your programs this summer. So this particular item, as well as several items, Dr. Shetson is going to handle. So Dr. Shetson, 3.1 is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Happy to present to you all this morning some updates on the early learning development standards. Wanted to let you all know that this committee has convened for quite some time to look at reviewing and revising our existing early learning development standards, and so the committee's work has concluded. So I wanted to provide you all with an update today as these draft standards progress. And so just a few notes, first of all, about what the ELDS are designed to do. They are designed to recognize the importance of the early years as indeed learning years. They are not meant to be a curriculum or assessment. They provide a set of common, developmentally appropriate expectations for what children typically know, understand, and are able to do at different points throughout early childhood. These standards are research-based, they're comprehensive, and they're written with the understanding that children reach developmental milestones at different times. They provide age-appropriate goals for children's learning and development. Just a few notes about the stakeholder uses of these standards. They're intended for the entire early childhood community. So they're not just meant for schools, but they're meant for everyone who engage and interact with our young children. So this includes members of the legislature and state administrators. And for them, the ELDS are goals for child development and learning that can help to drive decisions around policies and funding. For administrators and educators, the ELDS inform the use of curricula and assessments used in our early childhood programs. For our professional development providers, the ELDS should guide early childhood pre-service and in-service professional development offerings. We also would encourage the use for families, that the ELDS can be used to understand their own child's development and learning. For community partners, the ELDS help them understand child development and learning and also provide a common language with which to talk about child development and learning across health, nutrition, education, and other fields. There were a few ELDS revision goals that were named based on a stakeholder survey that we as a department facilitated. We had close to 400 responses on this survey that helped to guide these revision goals. The first of which is to make stronger connections. So one goal of the committee was to make stronger connections to kindergarten and kindergarten readiness expectations. Also, a stronger integration of language that supports our children with disabilities and our dual language learners. The committee also sought to reorganize the framework and structure of the standards to make it more user-friendly for folks who are using the standards. They also sought to embed commonly used assessments with intentionally to increase alignment, and also there was a need to update resources to reflect current research and the department's new initiatives. And so the department's role was to facilitate the standards review committee. And so a self-nomination process was used to identify the committee. Those individuals nominated themselves through an application process. And the committee included representation from school systems, Head Start, Early Head Start, child care, higher education, the Louisiana Department of Health, and parents. They are divided into 5 age levels, and these age levels were selected because they represent developmentally significant periods in a young child's life. You may also note that there is some overlap in the youngest levels. This is because children develop at different rates. So you can see the overlap between birth to 11, infants, 9 to 18 months, and so forth. This is because some children may not reach all of the indicators described in the first age level by the time they are 11 months old. So this is really just recognizing that our children develop at different times. And so they may change dramatically in one area while development progresses more slowly in another area. And so this was done very intentionally by the committee. The overlap reflects the fact that it is normal for children this age to vary a lot when they demonstrate the skills and behaviors described. On the next slide, you can see the organization of the standards across 5 domains, and these represent major areas of development and learning and define the essential learning for school readiness and children's long-term success. And the next slide, which I know is probably most important to you all, is the process timeline. And so you see that we've been at this for quite some time now, and now that the committee has wrapped up their work on the draft standards, we were able to bring these to the Early Childhood Advisory Council last week. However, we did not have a quorum for that council meeting, so they were unable to endorse the draft standards as is. So they were unable to endorse. You can see on the timeline, the plan as of now would still be to bring these to the June BESI meeting with implementation next school year, along with webinars, professional development, and resources to be released about the shift to these standards. I will say the most significant shift from our old standards to the new ones are really just in greater enhancement, user-friendliness, usability. They are more enhanced standards from the old ones, according to the committee and their work. And that concludes this update.
Ms. Chasson, if you could go back to slide 7. On February the 8th, the CDC released updated milestone guidance. I'm not quite sure if you've been made aware of that or not. There were 3 significant changes. According to the CDC, crawling is no longer a milestone. The milestone for walking was changed from 12 months to 18 months, and the milestone for talking was changed from 12 months to 15 months. I think the plan that you reflect is aggressive. However, my thought did shift to funding from the federal government that may align with prioritized milestones. Could you speak to that in any way, shape, or form?
So I'm not aware of that, but Ms. Jones, I'm happy to bring that feedback back to the committee that did this work. I will say we had, several folks on this committee. I talked about how the Standards Review Committee really represented a cross-sector of folks. So people from school systems, we had early childhood experts and researchers on this committee that I know use the most current research and practices. So this is feedback that I can make sure that they know of and were abreast of as they developed these standards. They were really, this past February, they were still engaged in the drafting of this work. So I'm sure they were aware as they did this. But I can go back and make sure from your feedback.
And again, my concern is not as much towards the state's aggressive timeline. I think it's great. However, if the federal government is easing back its guidelines and its directives for milestones, I think it's something that we should be aware of. Any questions or comments from council members?
Just a couple of comments, Mr. Jones. First of all, I want to commend Dr. Chasson for, I noticed that there was a committee that worked on this before bringing anything to Superintendent's advisory and before bringing it to Bessie, that included members, according to your documentation, representative from school systems, Head Start, Early Head Start, Child Care, Higher Education, Louisiana Department of Health, and parents. So that lets me know that multiple stakeholder groups were involved in the decision-making process before y'all bring it to Bessie. So I want you to know how much we appreciate that, particularly in light of many of the changes that are being discussed around public education even as we speak today. So thank you for making sure that we include a variety of stakeholders in those discussions. I also want to point out that I think it's to be noted that with early childhood, we recognize the fact that learning and developmental rates differ for children depending on a variety of factors. And I just kind of want to point out to the committee that that doesn't change as children get older. There are still different rates at which students develop and acquire knowledge and information and skills. And so again, for other conversations that may be had today, I think it's important to note that. So thank you for all the hard work that you guys have done. And if there's not any other disagreement, I move that we accept this and as a committee endorse the work that Dr. Chasson has led in there.
Before we entertain that motion, are there any other comments from council members? Are there any public comment cards?
Mr. Jones, just one comment. This has not yet even been endorsed by, I just want to make the group aware, this has not even been endorsed yet by the commission that drafted the standards. So I just want to make you aware that an endorsement hasn't happened there yet because they didn't have a quorum. If that impacts in any way your endorsement.
Is this going before Bessie in June, regardless of whether or not
I think that's an ongoing discussion at this point.
Public comment?
Question. Just a question. The class observation, which we work with in our 4-year-old programs and such, is there any change in these standards that would necessitate looking at that observation tool for evaluation purposes?
That's a great question, Superintendent Boche. No, I would actually answer that that was very much on the committee's mind when they were revising the standards. So if anything, the new standards are actually more aligned to class when we think about gold, that I know most folks use those gold assessments. These standards are actually more in alignment with gold than with class.
Mr. Morris?
Following Dr. Jacobs' comment, raised a question for me along the same line. So with the change in the standards, is that going to, do you think, drive more support for class as opposed to NIET? Or do you think there's still going to be a recommendation from the department to utilize both as appropriate?
So, Mr. Morris, these are early learning standards, so these go up through 4 years old in our 4-year-old programs. And when we talk about the use of NIT, that starts in kindergarten, not in preschool. So we're talking about, that's 2 different age groups. So this is in alignment for class, which is used up through those 4-year-old programs.
Dr. Chasson, I think it's relevant to mention that there are several school systems around the state who are participating in a learning year or a pilot around the class observation and the NIET tool to see if they can measure the same thing in those early grades. I don't want that point to be mentioned. The other thing that I would really like to stress, you mentioned gold, I certainly wasn't going to talk about TSG, but with you mentioning it, I think it's important that the state really consider that use and how that tool is actually being used, because once again, the TSG is only as good as the information that the teacher is inputting. It is totally teacher-driven. And a lot of educators see it just as something else that they have to do, something else that's time-consuming, because obviously they are tracking student data, they're progress monitoring as early as our 3-year-old programs, but TSG may not be the best mechanism to do that, and it is not considered as part of the teacher's observation, and it was mentioned along with the teacher, the class observation, so I want to make sure for the record that TSG and the class observation do not go hand in hand.
Any other comments from council members or the public?
Ms. Chasson, will there need to be any adjustments to curriculum? Will the department look at Tier 1? Is there anything that we need to be concerned about when it comes to resources, curriculum, what will be used?
So I would say no. Our curriculum for early childhood, we already, that runs through our instructional materials review process, as it has been over the last several years. That is included in there. We don't foresee that there are any adjustments being made to the standards that would adjust those instructional materials review rubrics. Those are cyclical, those are done every 6 years on instructional materials to rate them as high quality or not. And so these standards will be used for upcoming reviews, but I do not foresee that the changes are substantial enough that there would be any changes to curriculum.
Dr. Chasson, will you be bringing this back to the ELDS review committee for their recommendation of support or endorsement?
So that is what we're discussing right now, because we were unable to meet quorum last week. We were really hopeful that the council was going to be able to meet and take a vote. That's our Early Childhood Care and Advisory Council that meets to generally endorse any of our early childhood related policies before we bring them to BESI. Because they met without quorum and were unable to endorse, that is something that we're discussing right now.
So then, I guess, committee, would it make sense then to hold off on endorsing it until potentially the July 28th SAC meeting?
It's going to be presented at the June 4 BESI board with the committee entertaining doing a pending endorsement, pending the endorsement of the BCC advisory council.
As a matter of Robert's Rules of Order.
It's possible, but the point is for you all to give your feedback, and that is why the board brings you these items, obviously. So, if you have any concerns with anything, this would be the time to make it.
Well, I think the point that's being made is, a concern might would be if the advisory council doesn't endorse them. And so that's why people would be reluctant to offer an endorsement if the council who is set aside to review these things. So I can understand people's reluctance to.
Yes.
And your motion to endorse is still on the table.
We need a second.
Any other public comments? Comments from council members? We have an original motion to receive, substitute motion to endorse made by Superintendent Powell. Is there a second for the motion to endorse?
I'll second.
Second by Superintendent Watts. Again, the motion on the floor is to endorse. All in
We
favor?
had a note that if it does go back, if there are any changes made by ECCE, for it to come back to you all. Endorse, with directing the department to bring this back if the Early Childhood Council has any further recommendations.
I'd ask that everyone speak up so we're able to hear whether you move or whether you do not move to support. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion to endorse carries. Our next agenda item, 3.2, consideration of revisions to Ordinance 746, Louisiana Standard for State Certification of School Personnel regarding teacher certification requirements for geometry. Do I have a motion to receive? Motion to receive by Superintendent Lauderdale, second by Superintendent Jenkins. Superintendent Ronald.
Yeah, Mr. Jones, one of the things that we know is that everyone could benefit from additional teachers with certifications in geometry. And so at the last BESI meeting, we put forward a policy that essentially said if you were already a certified teacher, not necessarily in math, but a certified teacher, and you passed the algebra add-on test, and you passed the geometry add-on test, that you could be certified to teach geometry without having to take the more comprehensive math test for secondary education. A test that we know sometimes individuals struggle on that particular math test that's the more comprehensive test that might not struggle on the geometry. And so through conversations with the board, we ended up making a shift and simply said if the teacher has a certification already in place and then they take the geometry certification test and pass the geometry certification, then we can certify them in geometry. So I think this is really good because I think it will open up an avenue for teachers that presently does not exist, whereas if they have a certification and they want to just teach geometry, then they can go and certify in geometry. That's also important because there's legislation pending that would make geometry a required course across all of our high schools. And so this we believe is a really good opportunity. We are still working with the testing service to best determine when this test might roll out, when this might be available. I know there's some interest on the board to do it as quickly as we possibly can. So we are working through this process right now, but whether it becomes something that's in reality next week or 3 months from now, the good news is that in the very near future, this will be an opportunity for you to certify additional teachers in geometry that do not have to take the more extensive high school math test. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yes, you've done the update, which is great. I think the only thing just to clarify is that what you all heard at the last SAC meeting was that this geometry add-on was coming and it was being brought to the board. What has shifted that we just want to clarify for you all was that it was the board's desire to make this shift where that Algebra 1 exam is not required. What you all heard at the last meeting was that for that geometry add-on, folks would need to take the Algebra 1 and the Geometry exams and pass both successfully to get the Geometry add-on. Now the board determined that educators would just need to take the Geometry exam. And so that has been passed by the board. So just wanted to make sure you all had that clarification and that update today on what happened at the last BESI meeting.
And once we get more concrete timelines and test codes and all of these types of things, we'll make sure to communicate that out to the field.
Yeah, Dr. Bromley, we talked about this, Mr. Garvey and I last week. This is on schedule to come out in September, the test, and I know you know this and that's what you're talking about. But it could become emergency rule in June to have it effective immediately for the school for the start of school. So if you do see it coming back in June, that's to get it to a point where it's effective immediately. So just wanted to point that out.
Questions or comments from council members? Questions or comments from council members? Are there any green cards from the public? Mr. Morris?
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to express, the board's interest in moving this forward. And I think the expectation was we would be able to get it in place, prior to the fall, so we can take advantage of it and meet the need for the geometry requirement. So I was a little confused about the last conversation where it could be considered emergency, effective immediately, versus what we're doing now. And I don't really understand the difference there. So looking for some clarification with regard to the timeline going forward and what the specific hurdles are that would keep us from having this opportunity available for the fall semester.
So one, it's a question of whether that needs to be an emergency rule, and how often we do or do not use emergency rule, and for what purposes. So that's a question we're working to answer and consider. And then the second thing is the availability of the test to be ready and available for the educators to be able to take the test. And so that's what certification is, working with the testing company to better understand.
If the emergency rule was implemented, what would change?
Well, if the test would be available, it would be in policy sooner. And so potential educators would have the ability to take advantage of the opportunity that we propose sooner, as opposed to going through the normal process of how long it takes for something to come into rule.
One more question, if you don't mind. If the legislation passes this session, when will it be effective?
It is beginning with a certain cohort. So it's not as if, every student who's graduating next year has to pass geometry. I think it's with the incoming freshman cohort, if I recall.
Thank you.
Are there any other public comments? The minutes that were approved earlier in our meeting do reflect the council receiving this report last month. We have a motion and a second on the floor to receive the report.
Motion to receive the report.
Motion is to receive. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Agenda item 3.3, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 741, Louisiana Handbook for School Administrators regarding instructional minutes and continuous learning. Do I have a motion to receive? Motion to receive. Motion made by Superintendent Coker, second by Superintendent Johnson. Dr. Cronin?
Yeah, so over the last couple of years, we've all had to be flexible in terms of our delivery of instruction, whether it was fully face-to-face or sometimes going to remote or sometimes doing hybrid. As we hopefully come out of the pandemic, we all have learned a lot about those experiences, what does work, what doesn't work as well. And so one of the things that we're trying to solve for, and it was actually a motion by the board for us to look into policy relative to this, is whenever you think about the instructional minutes and what should and should not count for an instructional minute. And I'll give you an example of something that might be problematic. So for instance, if you are made aware at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. That you have a electricity out at a particular school, and you say, well, that's fine, we're going to make sure that we still get our instructional minutes, we're just going to go remote for that particular day. I would think it would be highly unusual that the classroom teacher who was prepared for a specific lesson with a particular delivery method with children face-to-face would be fully prepared to deliver that in a virtual format. And potentially the teacher may not even have electricity at his or her own home. And so that's an example of, are there times when individuals or systems might say, well, we're just going remote today, where there could be called into question the quality of that experience for children. And so our board called this, rightfully so, to our attention for something that we need to explore a few months back of what counts as an instructional minute. And so we have been working with our policy team, with legal counsel, with educators to try and get opinions of what should and should not count for instructional time. And I think Dr. Chasson has a brief report to make, but I think more than anything, we just kind of wanted to hear from the group around what is the validity of calling a remote or a virtual day quickly. And then do we really believe that in all of those instances, the children are receiving what we know that they need to receive? And maybe in your system, the answer is yes, absolutely. There's no difference between if the child's with us face-to-face versus if 10 minutes before we go remote. But I don't know that that's the case across the state. So Dr. Chasson, would you like to make a report?
During the 2020 legislative session, Senate Concurrent Resolution 63 created the Continuous Learning Task Force, and they were really asked to take a look at remote attendance, but even beyond that, how do school systems plan for learning to continue during emergency situations, after hurricanes, in the midst of a pandemic? So how does learning continue, and how are we better prepared for learning to continue than maybe we have been in the past? And so the Continuous Learning Task Force met multiple times over the year and ultimately submitted a legislative report around a few recommendations. And one of the recommendations was that new policy would come forth. And so there is some policy around continuous learning recommendations being brought to the June BESI meeting. And the recommendations covered 4 broad focus areas that school systems should be thinking about when they are planning for continuous learning. One is around technology, school and system planning, instructional quality, and family engagement and support. We did have representation on the Continuous Learning Task Force. We had Superintendent Powell, who spent his time giving to the Continuous Learning Task Force, as well as Superintendent Kennedy. So we're really thankful to have a lot of different folks on the Continuous Learning Task Force, and specifically to have those 2 superintendents to give their ideas and thoughts around planning for continuous learning. So when we think about the continuous learning policy, it really sits within Bulletin 741 and Bulletin 741 non-public. And the task force recommended that we include some policy language asking school systems to create continuous learning plans for their school system. So we have continuous learning guidance. We have a toolkit that we have created that we will release that has various resources and guidance around how school systems could think about planning for continuous learning, just really in an effort to be helpful and have one place to gather those resources. And so you see a proposed change to Bulletin 741 would include a written continuous learning plan for extended school closure that is annually updated and reviewed by stakeholders to the list of policies and procedures that each LEA is required to have. And you can see a parallel version to be placed in Bulletin 741 non-published. And this was something that I believe the task force felt pretty convicted about, that school systems should have a plan in place for continuous learning. And they met and talked in depth around what those areas for planning should be around, and you can see those here on the screen. And that is what the guidance and resources will include. It's just information about how school systems can think about planning for these different areas. Dr. Brumley talked a little already around instructional time and remote attendance. And so this is also a proposal for Bulletin 741 around instructional time and compulsory attendance. It basically captures that when school is canceled for whatever reason. And to Dr. Brumley's point earlier, we know that school is canceled for a variety of reasons. Sometimes for longer term, sometimes for shorter term, sometimes at very short notice. And if systems are unable to fulfill the instructional minutes requirements, there is a need for a waiver from BESI, as you all know, when you are unable to fulfill those requirements of the instructional minutes. In statute, we know that BESI can waive instructional minutes only in the case of a natural disaster that occurs in the last 30 days of school, or a natural disaster that results in platooning. Those waiver requests include a plan for what systems are doing to try to recoup that instructional time, and we see that done in a variety of ways, like adjusting the calendar, reclaiming holidays, or professional development days. And one piece of that plan that is presented in the case of asking for a waiver might be to use remote learning to promote learning gaps and deficiencies with that time that our kids are out of school. So regardless of whether the time is to be made up or not, the ultimate goal we know always is to ensure that our students are having the highest quality teaching and learning experiences. We also know our data has shown us from last year, you all were able to code students around the amount of time that they spent in virtual instruction versus face-to-face. And our data from last year is our state's evidence that our kids ultimately do better when they're in school. We know that their learning exponentially increases when they are in front of our teachers in our school buildings. And so this, you can see the verbiage that would be placed in 741 when it comes to instructional time and compulsory attendance. To aid in the development of expectations that will promote instructional quality and student engagement, we will be releasing our continuous learning guidance document to contain resources for you all. And I think Dr. Brumley, at this point, Mr. Jones, we wanted to open to any discussion amongst the council about instructional time and compulsory attendance.
Questions or comments from the council?
Mr. Jones, I would also point out we have Executive Counsel John Hunt here from the department, who has spent a considerable time looking at these laws over not just this year but many years, and so she is also well versed in this as well.
Superintendent Brookhouse?
So will that mean any variance from the adopted calendar would need a waiver? So we talk about the early morning closure, going remote for the day, that type of thing. Obviously, you wouldn't have a vested waiver until after the fact on those, right? But so how will that be? How will it be judged when you need the waiver?
Ashley, do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Can you, if I can,
Sorry. Superintendent Burkhouse had a question around the waiver and development.
Yeah,
Ashland
how will you know when you need to ask for a waiver? What will constitute, is it just a variance from your adopted calendar? What will tell you you need to go get a waiver?
If you do ever have any questions about whether or not you need one, we are always here to help, answer those specific situations or kind of navigate those unclear times. But really, this waiver would be if you're looking to substitute remote instruction for in-person instruction. So if you're going to be out for those days, we know state law requires that those days be made up. And so maybe you're offering some remote learning just in an attempt to bridge learning gaps, make sure that learning loss doesn't occur. But if you're trying to substitute remote learning time for in-person time and those instructional minutes that are needed, then that situation would require a lessee waiver.
But wouldn't it make sense if you only went, or you didn't meet the minimum requirement of the instructional minutes, not any time that
This is
you
only for
decide?
if you are unable to meet your instructional minutes. So we were talking about if you were falling outside of meeting instructional minutes, and this is just putting some parameters in place where you would have needed a Bessie waiver anyway, because you wouldn't have those instructional minutes. This is putting into place where part of your waiver, you could request that some of it is made up through remote attendance.
So, my question is, remote learning will not count towards instructional time unless it's approved after the fact?
Yeah. Joan, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, the law is still the same as far as waivers of instructional time can only occur either because of a disaster or catastrophe in the last 30 days of school, or a situation where there were shared school facilities. So that's not changing. So it can't just be any time during the school year. It would still have to fall into one of those two categories.
So it won't be viewed as an option to use instead of face-to-face?
Correct.
So I think, Dr. Browning, back to your original example that you gave, that I think is maybe what's created some of the concern here. According to C, under the compulsory attendance, it says remote learning shall only count towards the annual instructional minutes required by the revised statute when approved by Bessie. And so back to your original example, if there's a single school in our district that has to miss a day or two because they lost power, but we feel like we're still able to deliver remote instruction and want that to count, whether it's inside or outside the required instructional minutes, if we want it to count, we have to then apply for a Bessie waiver post-mortem after that situation happened, if we want it to count. Otherwise, it can't count.
Yeah, and I would add to, like, this particular policy is not, we're still very open to feedback on this because we're all trying to solve for this. And, I'll tell you first and foremost, number one is we need to make sure kids get what they need, okay? But the other issue is that it has been in places called into question, when systems say, we're going virtual today, or we're going remote today, and then the parent comes and says, well, I didn't see you do anything all day, but the system said you were virtual today. And so certainly that's not the condition everywhere. I'm not insinuating that at all. But it does call into question the effectiveness of doing that at times when it's not a planned event. And so we're very open to feedback on this particular policy. It's something that we all feel like we have to solve together. And we know we've learned a lot over the last couple of years.
If I may, just my opinion, I think there probably are schools or situations where that's what's happening. I think as long as it doesn't get below the 63,720 minutes, it's probably irrelevant. So that needs to be put in there, that if when looking at the whole school year, that school or that district did not go below the required instructional minutes, then no waiver is necessary. It would be only if that one day out for power brings that school or that district below the minutes, then you got to ask for the waiver. Because based on what's been going on, Bessie will be bombarded with waivers. If you just say any remote learning time for any reason requires a waiver, y'all asking for something you're not going to want. There's a lot of power outages. There's a lot of, you name it, right? Where people have been saying they were going remote. But as long as you meet the instructional minutes for the whole year, not including that, it shouldn't matter.
I agree.
Excellent points.
Questions or comments from council members?
Should that not be a decision for local school boards to decide? Why would it need to?
Because
To
the
the
law
level of
requires
Bessie.
it be waived by Bessie. It's in the law.
But, seems, what if the school system made a decision to have virtual days within its calendar? I mean, you look at all of the technology that was purchased during COVID and all of the investments that were made. So basically what you're saying is that stuff is just gonna be put on a shelf collecting dust if we don't continue.
I don't think
Using
that's what
that
we're
stuff?
saying. I mean, this is a discussion we had, as a team, but I don't think we're saying that. I think the law says that. Correct, Joe?
Correct.
Well, to be clear, this was a continuous learning task force in the event of a situation. It wasn't in general, providing instructional content via remote learning, can somebody, that was not the intent of the continuous learning task force.
Right.
I just want to make sure that was clear.
And to your point, Dr. Joseph, if you want to offer feedback, like now is the time, because we're not like sold on this is the exact way this has to be, and this is why we, even though we didn't feel like it was completely fully developed, we had a conversation that we want to bring it, and we decided, yeah, we do, because we want to hear what you all have to say about it.
I appreciate that. I guess I don't have all of my thoughts together on the whole thing because it's, I don't know, it just, something about it just it's not sitting well. And to exclude local boards, I don't know, it's not.
If you look at section 1103, it describes how remote learning can count towards attendance. And so I think if you apply these standards, then it's possible that it can count.
Where is it?
1103 in the handout.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I think section C would
But
be
C
where,
is, the part.
yeah, stuff where Dr. Brookhouse was talking about, that maybe an additional note, if the committee wanted to consider that, is that in the event that a school or system is in danger of not meeting the minimum instructional requirements, then they would have to go before that. And that may be understood, because that's when you're going to be concerned about this, whether or not. But if it's a single school, single time, I think that's where, as superintendent, you want to have to go to Bessie every single time and say, oh, can I count this or can I not count this? But in the event that it's in danger, we're in danger of not meeting the minimum minute requirement. So if that were noted in there, I think it might take away some of the concern there.
Superintendent Jenkins?
Yes, I think, first of all, thank you for working on this and having a conversation. I think that when we're talking about individual cases and collectively, I don't think there's not going to be, I don't think there's a tremendous argument for what I'm hearing today, but there are individual cases. I'll give you an example. I like to give an example. So, unfortunately, I had a school where there were plumbing issues related to the city, not the school itself. And so they say, oh, you'll be out 2 days, 1 day. And then it became 2 days. Then it became a week. Then it became a week and a half. And I think that all of us in here became really proficient during COVID using remote learning and using those devices. And so we continue on with instruction. And so in a situation like that particular case, it impacted that one particular school in that community. And, so we don't have to continue going back to asking for waivers from Betsy. I think that's what, if I'm hearing correctly, that's what we're asking, because sometimes you get some unique things that are beyond our control. And it's not always related to power. I get the power argument, but sometimes in these little small towns that we have, we get some weird things that really, really happen. And everybody has power. We can go remote and we can continue on with instruction, but we don't always want to come back and ask for a waiver every single time we have these types of things.
If I could defer to our two Bessie members and then Superintendent Bobby, I'll come back to you. Ms. Morris. Mr. Morris.
I just have a couple of questions. In reality, I think if you put a couple together, you may have to adjust your calendars. In the fall, you've got storms, hurricanes, or whatever. And so you make these adjustments already, and you're just real close to the edge, obviously. Then you have a situation that Patrick is talking about, and you don't have any kind of Bessie meeting close by. I mean, you could have school ending before you have the next Bessie meeting, where you may have a plumbing issue or whatever the issue would be. And you go to remote because power exists. Now, I mean, if no power exists, I don't know how we go to virtual in any way. But you go to remote and you make it work. Now, Bessie may be meeting after the fact before you can make any adjustment if they turn down the waiver or remote that particular day. So it's somewhat problematic from a nuts and bolts kind of thing. Is there a provision in the law? Bessie must waive it, but can Bessie in policy delegate that to the state superintendent? In other words, can that waiver be granted by the state superintendent on behalf of Bessie? Is that some type of a waiver that we could do legally in those situations where we've adjusted calendars and we're down to the wire and it's toward the end? Because most of us, especially those of us who are in impacted areas, storm areas over and over, we're used to making calendar adjustments, and we do it all the time. And we take holidays away and add minutes on, and we make it work. But in an extreme situation then, when you have something else toward the end of the school year, you've got to have a decision immediately, because you can't then come back. What do? Come back in June when it's over and say, oh, that day didn't count? Then what do you do? So there are timing issues with this kind of thing. So is there a way, Joan, to delegate that in Bessie policy that the state superintendent can be the designate of the board to consider those waivers in situations such as that?
Well, the law says certified by the state superintendent and approved by Bessie. I suppose it could be the approval by the board president that's later ratified by the whole board.
Okay. So we could do something like that, and it's got to be reasonable. I mean, you're not going to be asking, we're not going to be asking for a week or 10 days, and we're going to be adjusting as we go along. But when you're getting close to the end of the school year, it really makes absolutely no sense to tack on days in June if these things are happening after your March or April Bessie meeting. I mean, this doesn't make any sense.
And the law set up that it's that last 30 days, except for the shared
Well,
facilities.
it may not be within the last 30 days.
Yeah. So maybe we could work out something as far as.
And even if even if it's the 31st day or something like that, then what do? You've gone ahead and offered the remote learning, you think you did it, you applied for the waiver, and then Bessie says, no, you don't get the waiver. Then what do?
Then they have to come back and make up those days.
Oh, yeah, in July. We'll call them all that. No, it's a problematic timing effort that I think we need to really consider. It's not that anybody's out here trying to lessen the number of days, but it's got to make sense. The procedure has to make sense.
I think that there could be some definite unintended consequences, and it certainly takes local autonomy away. I mean, our current policy states that the superintendent, along with the board president, makes those decisions in collaboration. We always, in every case, adjust calendars as needed to reach the minutes unless it's within the last 30 days. We've had several times where we had to go remote this school year. We had to put a whole grade level on remote because of the COVID numbers. And so, in essence, what DESE and this law would say is that we as a school system don't have the authority to make that decision, that we don't have the quality to ensure that those things are done, and I just think that this definitely needs to be reconsidered.
I would add to that we have legislation as well as board requests for us to review this. And so that's why we're doing it, and that's why we're having the discussion. And I know a lot of you probably feel like that teacher at the faculty meeting when the principal calls in all the teachers and they're like, why is the principal saying all this? Because they feel like it doesn't apply to them whatsoever. But if there weren't places where this was a challenge, I don't know the extent we'd be having the conversation, but there are places where this has been a challenge over the course of the year. And so it probably would be good to provide some level of clarity, even if the clarity goes back to just what you said.
Yeah, just one comment and clarification. So appreciate the discussion, Superintendent Bromley and from the council as well, with regard to the concern for quality control, right? So we want to make sure that whether or not construction is correct or whether it is on a planned basis remote, that would ensure the quality of construction. So really appreciate that conversation. And then secondly, I was looking for, I think I have the right interpretation, so I want to confirm my understanding. Is really, there's no consideration for eliminating any hybrid conversation as an effective model today. The references here are strictly to something that's unplanned and how an unplanned event can be managed. That's my understanding.
I think that would go back to some of the conversations that Joan and I have been having about what can count for an instructional minute. And so that's something that we are presently reviewing.
So does that mean that?
It means potentially that it doesn't, it can't. We need to have some additional time to review that and look at that. And we're going to continue to do that, but certainly we wanted to hear feedback from the group. This is, I'll say again, this is not a policy that's ready to go. It's something that's complicated, and we're trying to do our best to figure it out.
So does that mean that a hybrid model is something that's still on the table, as far as from a legal perspective, to satisfy instructional minute requirement?
Joan, do you want to provide some feedback
I'm
on
not
that?
quite sure what you mean by hybrid model. Do you mean some kids in school and some having remote distance learning, or what do you mean by hybrid?
My general interpretation would be if the school has found an effective model for their specific location where 1 week for remote, 1 week for in-person, for whatever the extenuating circumstances are, on a planned basis. And again, to me, the distinction there is that it's on a planned basis, it's proven to be effective because of whatever the local circumstances are, or maybe what the student population is. But it's like to get clarification whether or not a hybrid model, which again would be something that we put in place on a planned basis by design in advance. If that is going forward, if that would satisfy the requirement for minutes for the calendar year or not.
That's a good point. What we were looking at were the unplanned situations, catastrophes, disasters, mechanical failures.
So I think we should have a distinction there.
Right, where suddenly there's not a day at school, and the district says, oh, we're just going to do remote learning today, we don't want to do
So I understand that conversation. I'm just trying to understand, is there another conversation about a hybrid model that's used again on a planned basis, because it's been proven effective, if that is legal going forward?
Well, there is a law for virtual schools in particular that have a site code and have been approved to be a virtual school. Currently, there's not a law addressing what you're talking about, a hybrid model, and that's coming for instructional minutes. So that is a different conversation.
Okay, so then what I'm hearing is that if I'm going to provide virtual instruction, and it's going to count towards continuous minutes, then I have to be approved in advance to be a remote learning provider.
To be a virtual school, what we're talking about currently in 17154.1, there's two ways. Schools have to provide 177 days of instruction, that's in the law. They have control of when it starts and their calendars and all of that, but they have to provide that minimum amount of instruction. If, as people have been saying, you're getting towards the end of the school year and you're not having enough instructional time, at that point is when the law says, the state superintendent can certify, and Bessie can approve a waiver of those instructional minutes. But it also conditions that waiver on the school system saying what efforts they've made to educate the kids. And one of those efforts could be remote learning, and it could be considered at that point. I think what you're talking about is at the very beginning, saying if you school are already approved to have a hybrid method of instruction, and there's not anything in the law currently giving Bessie authority to approve that.
And so we're almost there. So my question was, does the school have to be approved to provide remote learning in advance of the school year if their calendar year plan includes remote learning instruction?
That's what
That is not currently addressed in the law, is all I can say. The only thing addressed in the law is actual virtual schools that have been approved to be virtual schools and have a site code as virtual schools. Now, that might be something that could be explored, but it's not currently, we're not currently there.
I'd just like to get clarification on that point.
Superintendent Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. None of us expected COVID. None of us expected ice storms. And none of us expect something that's going to happen to maybe many of us as our maintenance supervisor is about to tell us that we may have a turnaround of maybe 6 weeks or longer for a chiller that goes out in South Louisiana when it's already 90-something degrees. So I say that to say that we always have to be prepared for effective remote learning. And we spent not only money and time, if we don't continue to do it effectively and efficiently, we're not going to be proficient and we will not be ready to do it at a moment's notice. So I think that we need to seriously consider ways that we can continue to do that. I can't speak for other parishes, but I know in Iberia, when we had some other events, the determining factor whether we were going remotely or not was whether or not we could give enough notice for teachers, students, and parents to be prepared for us to give efficient and effective remote learning. So I think that the trust in the districts needs to continue, and that we have to keep our preparation for this type of learning high. This is a sign of the times and a time when we're living. And I think that we need to continue to promote that in an effective way. Thank you.
And I would offer that I don't think anyone in the room here disagrees with that at all. I mean, I know that I don't disagree with that. It's just a matter of, one, can that day legally count? And that's what we're working to determine. And then just making sure, as Mr. Morris mentioned, that we have quality control when it does happen. And you're the person I was just talking about. If that's the ways in which you made the decision, those are probably very thoughtful decisions where the teachers had time to prepare and instruction could be delivered. I'm telling you, that's not the case everywhere in the state. And because of that, I think that providing clarity would be good.
Can I say just one more thing? If we don't have that opportunity, then I think some of us are seriously considered maybe even having a mock remote learning during the school day when we actually have school to maintain that competency of skills that are required.
And some systems build those days in already to have remote days even when they were going to be at school just to prepare for that. Yeah.
I think that goes back to my original thought about there's something wrong with not having a local control with this, because, you know, in St. Helena, we really had to make a huge leap to get our kids, to the point where they are successful virtually, right? And we spent lots of money to make that happen. I'd hate for us to change up, the normal it's no longer the normal, right? We have to continue to use the equipment that we have. We want to continue moving forward with having that opportunity for kids and for our teachers to learn, in that virtual space, and, just stay with the times with that. And I think that if your local control, like if we had a plan in place that our board approved, where our calendar is set, where we do have virtual days and we do have opportunities for students who are our learners to miss a day of school and be able to, make it up at home. You know what I mean? Like if they have to go to the doctor or something. I mean, it has some effects that are unintended consequences about us wanting to move forward in this, what we call our brave new space, dealing with this technology. And I hate for all of the stuff, all of the equipment that we spent to just sit on the shelf because we didn't do what we needed to do to continue sharpening, the virtual space and having our teachers and our learners do a better job at, teaching and learning in that virtual space.
Agree with you as well, Dr. Joseph. I mean, we can't run away from technology. I mean,
Right.
We need to embrace it, we need to get better at it, those types of things. So we're working to get there.
So, but this policy would, in my mind right now, it would limit our abilities to do that if we have to always go to Bessie and not have something in place at the local level, where our local board and superintendent would make decisions about what's best for their situation.
Any other questions or comments from council members? Superintendent Gray?
Yes, so like Ms. Laviolette over in Iberia Parish, we all kind of function in that manner. Whereas if we knew in advance that we have electricity out, a chiller is going down or something like that, Ms. Laviolette, we've gotten really good at replacing chillers within 24 hours, having people call my people. But, so it. With the checkbook. With the checkbook. So being prepared for those short turnaround emergency services has really been beneficial to us. I look at it like the old slug package that we used to have prepared, and it wasn't like just run all papers and put it in there and have it celebrated. No, it has to be something that's currently being done. So that is high quality instruction that will be taking place on those days. So my question becomes, if this is something that it has to be approved after it has occurred, and I think this is going to go to the comments being made earlier, will there be some type of rubric or criteria that is set up beforehand for us to know what it is that would be most likely to be successfully approved for Bessie by giving that to us ahead of time? So if we know what that looks like, then we can make sure that when we have those remote days, we know that we've hit all the marks that Bessie will be able to approve that particular point. I think that if we're going to have to approve a long-range plan for remote learning, then why not have another caveat associated with that that says for temporary use of technology or remote learning, this is part of your plan too, so that makes it a little bit easier for us as well.
Should I just add to that, which I think he's on something? We're going to have to develop a continuous learning plan. That's part of what each district is going to have to do according to this. So one of the components in that continuous learning plan, we could put in there the mechanism for these short-term situations. And if we have that plan in place prior to the beginning of the school year, and it's sent in and accessible to everyone, I don't know if Bessie can approve these things or whatever, but I don't know the mechanism we're talking about. Is it just following the plan, or is that part of some approval process we have to go through? But as long as it's written in there and it's a valid way to address a short-term situation like the chillers, like pipes bursting, then there should be no problems with that in going forward. Because like Dr. Gray is saying, there's got to be some rubric set up, because we're not going to, just looking at these things after the fact makes no organizational or business sense to me whatsoever. there needs to be something that we can look at prior to make sure that we have all of the issues in place.
I just wanted to respond to Superintendent Lavallee's comments, really appreciated your comments with regard to quality control, and wondering what this council thinks about the point she made about planned days for ensuring that remote learning capability is, effective remote learning capability is actually in place. I'm just really curious what others on the council thought about that as far as making that a requirement as part of a continuous learning plan.
Would that requirement need to be reflected in an update to the law?
Yes, the way the law is set up now, the waivers are only allowed in those two situations, the last 30 days of school or the shared facilities. So absent that, there's no other leeway for granting a waiver outside of those two circumstances legally.
It does appear that it would be good if the essence of this conversation was reflected in either a Senate bill or a House bill in an upcoming legislative session.
I'd like to make a comment, Mr. President, if I can, in regards to Ms. Morris's comment. I don't necessarily know that a requirement or obligation to hold one of those things. While I certainly agree practicing those types of days, but you can do that within the school setting itself. I don't think you necessarily need to remove it from the actual day, because I would never want to miss one day of instruction to implement a remote learning day such as that, but to use the day itself.
Connectivity, and what we could look forward to in the fall with regard to how effective our connectivity is relative to last year, same time. So I think this fits into that conversation really well. Is there some way that we can consider on a planned basis, maybe during the regular school day, like you're saying, that we have some means to attain some level of confidence that we do actually have that connectivity with our students in expectation that we do live in South Louisiana and things are going to happen, and we're going to need that connectivity, at an appropriate time.
If I may, to Dr. Odom's point, I think in general, all of us agree that it's a good idea. Ms. Lavallee brought up practicing a virtual day during the school day is a great idea. I think one of the things that we can't practice for, and maybe this is to your point, Mr. Morris, is the lack of connectivity that so many of our children still suffer from, particularly in the most rural parts of the state and in some larger parishes where there's rural components to it. So I think all of us agree that in practice, doing a practice day for virtual actually would help prepare our teachers for that, for sure. But in terms of dealing with I think the last number I saw was still 25 to 28% of our students that do not have connectivity in the state. It still creates an issue there, which again, goes back to the full plan that our task force was set up to do, is to try to have plans for dealing with technology and connectivity as well as all of the other components of it. So I think there's just multiple layers to this. We've kind of gotten, I don't want to say stuck into a conversation about whether or not instructional minutes are going to count, but the layers that continuous learning task force was addressing, it would be kind of revealed in our planning that I think is the point for us to do every year as a system.
Mr. Jones, I would like to just add, and I don't know if Ms. Davis can do anything officially, but for us, the discussion's really been rich and helpful because we're just all trying to get better around this particular thing. We're all facing this new world. So this certainly isn't something that we're going to be ready to bring to June for Betsy, because we just need more time with the commission and task force, and then to get some additional considerations based on feedback. And I knew it wasn't ready today, but this has been helpful. So I don't know if you need to do anything, but we don't intend to bring this to June.
Okay. I do think the motion said we had to bring something, so you might want to give an update of some sort. But I think the whole issue was that the board the officers in particular, when there were tornadoes coming, sprouting up this past spring, the messaging was, we're closing the system, we're going remote in the morning of, or the day before. And so the board had questions, when that does happen, what would count, what wouldn't, is attendance being taken, that kind of thing. So that's why they wanted to look into this, but it definitely would require some further discussion.
Any other questions or comments from council members?
I just had this on my mind that we have those smaller level issues when a teacher is absent, right? The teacher calls that morning or that night and says, hey, I'm not coming to work. So there's got to be some type of work or assignment for those kids, right? It's like we have to plan for those kids. So we deal with that every day in that situation. So when we're talking about school-wide, and the principal is saying, or whoever is saying, we need to cancel, I'm sure there's something in place for the school. I don't think they're just saying, hey, we're just doing virtual just so we don't have to make up the days. There's got to be something in place for all of the kids, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. There's something, I know for my kid, it was asynchronous, and there were assignments that she had to complete. And the teacher made, checked that work, and she made sure she did that work because the expectation was set. So, and I know it's different in every district, so I'm going to go back to that local control that, there's got to be some level of that involved in this whole thing instead of taking it straight to Bessie.
I started it, maybe I can finish it. So I think this evolved into a discussion of the validity of online learning. I think it started as a district calls for a remote learning day in the morning at 5 a.m. and nobody brought their computer home.
Correct. Exactly into it.
I think that's the issue here, right? You can't call a remote learning day when nobody has their computer home. And I think, I don't know, that's how this started.
Yes.
But it ended with a viable discussion of the validity of online learning. But
that goes back to making a plan, right? Having a plan in
Exactly.
place.
That's what we really
Like we need to have a substitute folder in place when a teacher that you have to have some kind of plan in place when we say, hey, look, we're gonna have to do that. And the calendar and all that other stuff, so.
Questions or comments from any other council members? We do have a public comment card submitted from Danny Garrett with Elds.
Jones, Danny Garrett, Executive Council, LSBA. I think we're in a situation where sort of the words on the page have not kept pace with the reality of our life. RS 17-154.1, which is the statute that sets forth instructional minutes and instructional days, was last amended in 2017. In 2017, the ice storm hit Baton Rouge. They just closed the school for 2 days. So it was the only option. Because of COVID, virtually everybody now has the ability to go virtual. My wife is actually a teacher, and she prefers to teach her kids in person. But when they've gotten notice that there's a weather event coming and an abundance of caution, sometimes you'll say, look, we don't want to take the chance that we're trying to get those kids home in the middle of a terrible storm. So, hey, tomorrow we're going to go virtual. Make sure all your kids know, make sure you're prepared. It's nothing new. We did it for a year, but now we know how to do it better. There's actually nothing in RS 17-154.1 that actually says in person. Now, that's because back in 2017, the last time it was amended, and going all the way back to, this statute goes all the way back to the 80s, that was not an option. It would be like 20 years ago when somebody said, give me a call as soon as you can. Well, if I can get to a payphone, I will. Now, somebody that calls back in 3.5 minutes, they're ghosting us, right? Because everybody's getting it immediate. So there's actually nothing in the law that prohibits Bessie from counting a valid virtual day done in accordance with a continuous learning plan as instructional aids. I think we kind of got off on the issue of, well, you have to go to get to Bessie if you've got to reduce. So if you ran into a situation where even with your virtual days, you still weren't going to be able to meet the minimum instructional days, you'd have to go to Bessie and get the waiver. But the worry, I think, with the way this discussion has gone is that if Bessie, by regulation, were to say, well, we're going to insert in-person into the instructional day requirement, and we're not going to count virtual days as instructional days, well, then all of a sudden, you've told school districts, yeah, you're going to do virtual instruction for those days, we're just not going to count them. And that's going to create the potential that more districts get to that situation at the end of the year. I mean, Superintendent Joseph, y'all had to go from nothing to everything. Y'all are one of, some districts had already started sending laptops home and kids doing stuff virtual. Now everybody has to be able to do it. And I think that's the notion, is that as long as a district has a plan, as long as they have the ability to carry it out, and it may be a situation where if you have a widespread power outage in your entire district, you really can't do a virtual day, because you might not have the ability to do it, your teachers might not have. So that's just a day, that's a weather day. That's the old weather day. But now, we actually have the ability to avoid the sort of rudimentary weather day, and kids still get instruction. I mean, we've all seen situations where a school district, out of abundance of caution, calls a weather day because they're worried, and then the storm turns the other direction and it's sunshine and everybody's still at home, and they're like, well, why didn't you have school that day? Well, now, they still have school that day. They just have virtual school that day. So I think the caution would be, don't do something by regulation that reads into a requirement, into the statute, that's not there. Again, the statute doesn't say in person, because back in 1980s, 90s, even 2017, nobody thought that they thought that would probably been redundant to put that in the law. But since they left it out, it's now up to Bessie to decide. We can recognize that a valid virtual instruction day actually counts as an instructional day. There's nothing that stops Bessie from doing that. I guess there's also nothing that stops Bessie from saying it doesn't count. You have to come back and get approval after the fact, which to me kind of makes no sense, because what if they say no? You just go back, oh, we thought we had this many days, but now we don't. But I think we have an opportunity to acknowledge what technology is today, to acknowledge what districts can do today. And Bessie could actually formally recognize that instructional days conducted in accordance with a continuous learning plan do count towards your instructional days and instructional minutes. And I think it would solve their problem rather than create a problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gare. Mr. Marsh.
Yeah, appreciate those comments. I just wanted to say personally that I'm concerned about the level of ambiguity in the conversation going into the fall school year. And I'm hoping that we can get clarification to address that ambiguity, given the technology that is available to us, and recognizing that we are going to have events through the school year, and we do need to have a plan in place. So hoping that we can get some resolution on that, get some confirmation on what the policy is going forward. Thank you.
And I just want to clarify, our current policy states that a whole day attendance is considered that when a student is physically present at the school site or participating in an authorized school activity. So that is our current policy.
Are there any other public comment cards that we have received at this time pertaining to agenda item 3.3? If not, we have a motion on the floor to receive. All in favor, aye? Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Agenda item 3.4, consideration of an update report regarding the Louisiana school, district, and state accountability system. We have a motion to receive. Motion by Superintendent Portland, second by Superintendent Johnson. Superintendent Brumman.
Yes, sir, thank you.
Just want to take everyone back a couple of years around accountability and walk you forward to where we are today. So during the 2020-2021 school year, the department invested considerable time with the Accountability Commission, the Superintendent's Advisory Council, with the intent of bringing forward to Bessie a set of recommendations on accountability for K2, for our K2 students, and our the way in which we rate our high schools across the state. Particularly, we wanted to give additional emphasis to some of the work happening with Bessie and Board of Regents and legislatively with dual enrollment, but also the elevation of career and technical education to make sure that we weren't just saying in our words that advanced career and technical education matters, but in our policy and the ways in which we awarded points, we were also saying that. So we brought that conversation for a year. At an accountability commission, there was a motion to also increase growth weight in the ways in which schools were awarded points for growth of students. And so all of those policies went forward to Bessie. Last summer, they were deferred. And then they were deferred again, a second time. And so at that point, I made the statement that we probably should take a more comprehensive view. I believe that to be true since, in fact, that those policies were not the right ones at that particular time. And so we decided we would take a more comprehensive view. We also set up a work group of 3 Bessie members to be appointed by the board president that would really study the growth piece, the way in which growth is calculated, what does it count for, how much does it weigh, what are the struggles with the current calculation and formula, and what things work within that calculation and formula. So that motion was approved for that study group to be established, I believe, in October. And then in December, there was a revision to that study group to make that not just a 3-person study group, but a 5-person study group with Bessie members, and for them to look at the comprehensiveness of the system, not just growth. And so from that point until now, we have been working alongside, Mr. Lambert and myself have been working alongside a group of 5 Bessie members who comprise the Bessie study group, work group on this particular item. And I say that to say, like, I want to make sure everyone knows there are no simulations or proposals that are in place to go forward to the full Bessie for any type of consideration. What we have done up to this point is provide simulations to that work group upon their request. We provided options that could be considered. But I just want to be very clear with this group that there are no proposals on the table from us as something that we are concretely taking to Bessie requesting approval. But what we wanted to use the opportunity for today is just for Mr. Lambert to give you a brief overview of where we are. But then also I wanted to let this group know that at Teacher Leader Summit, and I've shared this with some of you already, we're also going to make ourselves very available to discussions around the accountability formula. Mr. Lambert will have a booth set up with tea and cookies for you all to partake and enjoy and visit with him on accountability. So find him there. Take the opportunity to make conversation there, but wanted Mr. Lambert to also make a brief presentation around where this Bessie study presently stands.
2 things. It's been downgraded from bun cakes to cookies, so.
There was going to be nothing but cakes.
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing is, I joined the team in the middle of between the work group being created and the initial proposals in June. And Dr. Brumley did not tell me how much fun I was going to have, nor how many friends I was going to make as a result of taking on this role. So, but I'm excited to be here. Before we get into the study group, there's a quick update to share related to other Bulletin 111 revisions. So in December 2021, the Accountability Council endorsed a set of changes to Bulletin 111 around the humanities, the innovative assessment around humanities program. In addition to these revisions, the council we sought endorsement from the council in May of 22. There was not a quorum there, so they were unable to endorse those proposals, though we're not in a place where we believe that we would require an endorsement because of the reason why these changes are being brought to these two bodies. In 2019, Bessie adopted a policy related to this humanities assessment, which is going to be renamed the Innovative Assessment Program, that would have allowed participating school systems to use the higher of their IAP score prior to the pilot in their SPS if their score would go down as a result of the pilot. So if their scores the year before were higher, they could replace those with, over the current year scores. So essentially a hold harmless policy related to the IAP. As we worked with the U.S. Department of Education to bring revisions to our ESSA plan, because we discovered those had not been done in 2019, the U.S. Department of Education was extremely clear with us that that was not permissible under the IADA application that was submitted by the department in 2019 to participate in the program. As a result, we will need to make revisions to Bulletin 111 to say that we will use the actual in-year scores for schools that participate in this pilot, because part of the pilot application was the statement that these scores would be comparable to the LEAP 2025 in compliance with our consolidated ESSA plan. And as a result, we cannot use the higher of 2, we can't do any of those things. We have to use the actual scores generated by that student in that school year. So wanted to provide this update and provide the opportunity for other questions.
Yeah, I have some questions, I guess, because we were one of the first districts in Washita to actually jump aboard the innovative assessment. And I guess my biggest concern with all of this is the communication. I think we've gone through 3 or 4 leaders within the State Department on the innovative assessment. We started in 2018 with Chanda, and I mean, it was, you know, things were rolling along, and I guess we could take away the innovative part because it was a humanities being combined with the ELA. It is no longer the humanities, it's just the ELA. And so why weren't the districts who are participating in this, why weren't we informed of this at an earlier time so that we could have made a different decision possibly?
2 things. The U.S. Department of Ed's position was once we gave the first IADA test for this year, a school could not exit that pilot program. So once we found out, it was too late. There have been 2 windows of testing that had already occurred. The other thing is that we communicated to superintendents a couple weeks ago this discovery, where we were as we worked with US Ed to determine, was there a creative solve here? What could we do? Reviewed the application that we submitted to the feds around this to see if there was any opportunity to do something different, and we weren't able to.
Not satisfactory.
Sorry about that. I'm unable.
But are we going to tell 1,300 7th grade students that now you don't have a choice like the rest of the students do in the state when we didn't know from the start?
If those students would like to take, or if you would like to have your students take both assessments, that's totally fine. We can allow that to happen, but we can't replace the scores.
I don't think they're going to be up for taking another assessment. The communication, and I was the state supporter for innovative assessment, I will tell you. Thought it was a great idea. I thought it was something you teach a guidebook and then you test those students immediately on the guidebook, and you're going to get a true reflection of what the students were getting. So I was 100%. And then we get into a different platform being used, Atom, which was a nightmare in itself when you're trying to get your teachers, 7th grade teachers who are using Atom and also using DCR, depending on what they're actually testing. I think we need to really step back and look at what's going on with innovative assessment right now. And the fact that we are not comparing apples to apples, and we are taking any choices away from districts who have elected to do the innovative assessment, you know, I just think that it's been handled real poorly the past year. And I was the supporter of it. I was the one that was saying, let's do it, let's go. and then all of a sudden, it comes back and it blows up in our face on this. That's not fair to our kids.
At this time, Mr. Lambert is taking questions and comments specifically to Bulletin 111, humanities revisions of agenda item 3.4. Any questions or comments from the council?
Mr. Lambert, does that include all innovative assessments, the wit and wisdom pilot?
Grade 7, if it's grade 7, it's operational. If it's not grade 7, then it won't.
Any other questions or comments from council members? Questions or comments from the public specific to Bulletin 111, humanities revisions? I do have a public comment card, but as I appreciate it, may not be specific to the humanities revision. He just paused for questions and comments, so I'm trying to separate the two conversations. Ms. Wendy, am I correct in saying?
Okay, update on the Bessie Study Group. The Bessie Study Group will be finalizing a report of its activities and findings after their thorough review of the accountability system that they have been doing over the course of the last 6 months, 8 months. The full report will be discussed at the June Bessie meeting and will include problem statements, issues explored and value statements, shortcomings of, proposals to address concerns, the formal stakeholder engagement and feedback process that will happen in June and July, including a key set of areas to seek feedback ahead of the August Bessie discussion, which will include implementation timeline and resources needed, shortcomings of the proposal, positive features of the proposal, areas of concern, and do the incentives feel measurable and attainable. In August, we anticipate bringing a draft set of bulletin revisions inclusive of that feedback and the study group's work that can be considered based on all of that feedback at the August Bessie meeting. I've met with some of you all, basically anyone who sent me an email and asked to talk, I have been happy to do that. And 1 or 2 members, no, actually I don't know if any member of the council has actually reached out individually, though in small groups I have met with folks to talk about this. But as we've gone through, we've received a lot of feedback, lots of thoughts. Anytime that somebody can grab me in a hallway, they're ready and willing to talk to me, and I'm ready and willing to listen. So I figured I would just like share out what I have captured as like quick feedback from people. Not necessarily saying that you'll notice that these things actually sit in tension with each other because people feel one way and then other people feel another way. So I'm just going to rattle off some things that I've heard and then we can open it up to discussion with the full group. ACT. College readiness has been held in our state to be a composite of 21. Why are we awarding points below that expectation? In tension with that, we've heard that why aren't we rewarding schools that help students receive TOPS tech funding? That score is below where we start to award points. So we've got 2 things that are sitting in tension. Feedback from folks that the 21 is where we should start awarding points, and then we have other folks who are sharing that TOPS tech is actually a lower standard than that, and maybe we should reward that. Previous ACT proposals included a banded approach. What we've talked through with the work group to this point has been the idea of removing the work keys exception, but not banding just yet. But one question was, why aren't we exploring that? Should we explore that? On the strength of diploma, how will the revisions to strength of diploma impact small populations, particularly with regard to credentialing? Is this devaluing the high school diploma? How do we ensure that the quality of dual enrollment coursework is held to the same standard as other credentials which have an assessment associated with them? Do we have the right set of credentials? Are there other credentials, experiences, coursework that could be rigorous enough to value? An example was given to how we had endorsements in the previous accountability system that were rigorous and schools scoring points for that. We've also heard this seems to be measuring beyond high school. The expectations around all of these credentials is some kind of college credit or post-secondary credential. So it's measuring after high school and setting the expectation to earning things for students after high school. We've also heard that these incentives in the strength of diploma would be costly to school systems. And also there's an inequity of resources depending on how close you are to a community college or to other programs that can help you earn those credentials. And then are we changing the high school experience to beyond? Is that the right call? Assessment index. We've heard from folks that 2 things that actually sit in tension with each other. We have heard from some folks that they would be interested in removing the points for basic because mastery proficiency is our standard. And that was a discussion the last time the accountability system was revised. And then we've also heard, why aren't we awarding points for approaching basic as we look at the incremental progress that students make below basic toward mastery. So those two things have been said that sit in tension with each other. Student growth, incremental growth and progress should be rewarded. A variety of perspectives have been shared on negative scale score change and what that actually means as it relates to our test. And then you've got the debate of people that are pro-VAM and people that are anti-VAM, which is a conversation that has been had over and over again with a lot of different folks and will be part of the report. So with that, I'll open the floor to discussion if everyone is all warmed up and ready to discuss.
At this time, we'll have questions and comments from council members. We'll also include our BESI members. Mr. Marsh does serve on the BESI study group. If you are a member of the public and you'd like to make public comments, please go ahead and complete a public comment form and please turn it in to me so we can make sure that your comments are heard. Comments and questions from the council.
If I could just start, just for the good of the council and everyone in attendance. The plan is to go to BESI in June with a recommendation. Can you kind of talk about the timelines first for potential changes so that we could better understand when we talk about stakeholder feedback and development of a new accountability system, how that's going to impact our systems and our students?
Absolutely. So at the study group will review a report that Ms. Orange-Jones and I are developing together related to the activities that the group has gone through, including the items that are listed here underneath the second bullet. Once that happens, we will begin a formal stakeholder engagement process that includes the different simulations, ideas that the study group has come together around trying to solve the list of issues that if you go and look at any of our slides, starting with, I think, the third meeting, we've started to put a list of issues we're trying to solve. So you should see alignment between issue trying to solve and potential solution. We will then go to you all, do stakeholder engagement with this group, other councils, in a formal way with slides that you would be used to that show this is what it is, this is what it would do, get your feedback, and then in August we would anticipate bringing proposals to the board for consideration around accountability, including the timeline on which they would be adopted. So for example, one conversation that's been had is how do you implement the high school incentives given the lag in that indicator. And if you implemented it almost immediately, you would actually have students that had already graduated and systems hadn't had the opportunity to respond to the incentives in the formula. Does that seem right? Is that what we're trying to do, or are we trying to do something else? So those would be conversations we would have with you all between June and August, and then bring something to the board for consideration then. Is that helpful?
Questions or comments from council members?
This can't be easier than the virtual attendance conversation.
It's not. So, I'm going to start off with words matter. Words matter. So the first thing is, this is a very complex situation. And I want to preface, I'm not trying to be divisive or anything like that. I'm just being observant, and I've just been in this for so long. So you have people with a singular lens looking at a very complex situation. And when they look at it from their singular point of view, it's like tunnel vision. They just see this one thing, but they don't understand how that one thing impacts everything in this complex situation. So you talk about ACT, but everybody across this nation, they're not using ACT the way we're using ACT. ACT for us is 25% of a school performance score. But that is not the case for a lot of other states. So when you say that the average is a 21, Well, I don't know, I mean, and then when you downgrade, by saying a 17 is below the standard, words matter, because there are a lot of kids who, when they make a 17 and they get that TOPS Tech scholarship, that's a lot for them. When we talk about our special needs kids, when we talk about the kids who struggle every day, trying to keep, have their parents keep the lights on, of food on the table, that 17 is more than the standard for them. So when you use those words, it makes it, the strength of diploma, the proposals that are out there is basically like have and have-nots. I cannot afford, in my district, IB. I can barely afford AP. I can barely afford dual enrollment. Had it not been for those ESSER funds, our kids would not have access the way they have access now to it. And so that is about haves and have-nots. So, and you say that you're grading the kids twice with the graduation rate and the strength of diploma. I'm going to push back and say that is not the case. Your graduation rate, do you know how hard it is to keep all of the kids who come in ninth grade together to graduate in 4 years? That's like herding cats sometimes. Just trying to keep them all together. That is something completely different from the individual student in that cohort doing something more than just getting the high school diploma with the credentials. So that's two, the way I see it, that's two separate things. So you say that, but you say it is double points for the kid. Well, when you look at the subgroup population, those kids are getting hit 2 and 3 times in accountability. So I don't understand how you can say that, have that argument for strength of diploma and graduation rate, but you're not looking at all of the other ways kids are hit twice and 2, 3, 4 times in accountability. Strength of diploma and graduation rate is not the same. And then you use the term incentives to incentivize teachers or the adults in the school to do these particular things. That's not incentivizing. You are basically cracking the whip is what you're doing. You're trying to say, in order to push them to do the right things for kids. What makes you think that we're not doing the right things for kids already? With all of the issues that we have, you have one set of test scores from 2019 to make a decision about all of the things you want to do moving forward. You don't even have enough data to make these changes. And my last point right now is that you're looking at a whole school and district, you're looking at the whole structure, a school performance score. You're looking at the whole thing to say there are too many A schools in this state. There are too many A schools in the state because it's not aligned to the NAEP test, right? The NAEP test is just that, it's a test that most kids, they're randomly selected to take this test. They just finished taking their LEAP test, EOC, or whatever other test, so they're not concerned about the NAEP test. They will not take that test seriously, which is probably why you see poor performance on that test. But you're going to look at just the NAEP test and then compare that to an entire accountability structure, instead of just looking at the results from the assessments the kids are making. If you pull out just the assessment piece and compare that to the NAEP, which is apples and apples, you will see that our kids are on par with that. You'll see it. Instead of looking at the entire structure. Am I making sense with that? It's like it's just not, words matter, and the way you look at things matter, and the questions that you ask matter, your value statements matter, the issues that you're exploring. all of those things matter. And it goes back to your real problem statements. Do we really have the problems that you're talking about?
Do you believe that 69% of our high schools are an A or a B? 69% of the schools in the state are an A or a B.
What's your point in asking that question, though?
Well, you
What's
asked me
your
a lot of
point?
questions, so I'm gonna ask a few back and I'm
Okay,
gonna address each
yeah,
of
but
them.
what's your point in asking that question?
Because you challenged that point.
Yeah, but that particular question, what does that have to do with everything that I said?
Because it seems that you believe that we are measuring schools accurately right now. And I haven't heard you say that you think that we need to make adjustments. All I've heard is reasons why we should keep things the same. And I will go through each of your points, but I would love to hear, do you think that 69% of the high schools in the state of Louisiana are an A or a B?
The question is it? Is it 69%?
There are 69% of
All
high
right,
schools are A or B.
so you're saying that those 69%, they don't deserve to be an A or a B?
I'm just saying that I think that it's hard to believe that 69% of our high schools are an A or a B.
Why?
Just based off of our NAEP rankings, for one, and I'm going to respond directly to your NAEP comments in a second. Because the two things sitting together, right, your argument, right, that NAEP kids are not taking it seriously, then why are our NAEP results so closely correlated with our LEAP 2025 results? And when you look at our proficiency standard of mastery, we actually have a very, very similar proficiency standard to NAEP's proficiency standard. So the kids perform about the same on the NAEP as they do on LEAP 2025.
I just said that. That's what I said. When you pull out just the assessment piece of an entire school performance score, yes, you will see that is absolutely right. If you look at just that, there are no A schools with that, and there are only a few Bs. But the difference is the A and B schools that are out there, they are doing exceptional work with all of the other components in the school performance score. So why are you saying that those schools don't deserve that A or B? And if they don't deserve the A and B, then why are you looking at the strength of diploma to reduce the A's and B's when that has nothing to do with the NAEP results?
Because when you look at, so if we're just going to take two examples, right? The majority of the elementary school formula, it is based off of assessment outcomes, right?
Yeah.
So it would be very closely aligned with how we do NAEP, or how NAEP results come out. Elementary school results are significantly worse in terms of when you look at the SPS calculation than high schools. Two reasons for that. Half the formula is some measure of graduation outcomes, which are higher than student achievement on assessment results. So you still haven't answered the question, should 69% of schools, high schools, be an A or a B?
Yes, they should be the A and B based upon the school performance scores that these singular lens people created for a complex situation. So the way you have it set up right now, yes, they do deserve to be the A and B schools because they put the work in to make that happen. But if you once again pull out the assessment piece from the school performance scores, it is aligned to the NAEP. It is, and you said it yourself that it is.
And the results will look like elementary schools.
But what you want to do is you want to look at the strength of diploma to just to reduce A's and B's. That's what you want to do. Instead of looking at the assessment index and saying, okay, what's aligned and what's aligned? Do we really need to take a look at the Tier 1 curriculum? Do we need to take a look at the standards? Do we need to take a look at all of the other things that's happening as the reason why those kids are not passing those tests? Instead, you go to the school, you go to the strength of diploma and say, hey, this is a place where I can go to drop down A's and B's. Bam, there you go. Is that really fair?
I think that the real question is, or what I'd like to respond to is that that's not why we looked at the strength of diploma. It's absolutely not. The strength of diploma is definitely a place where we have inflated that score, without a doubt. If you're talking about strength, an A, if you're talking about the strength of it, an A is not an indication of strength. If everyone gets an A for having it, that means an A is strong. Right now, when a student graduates, you get an A in both indices, the graduation rate and the strength of diploma. How else would you measure the strength of that indicator, right, than to say that some things are worth more than others? And right now, a school can be an A for graduating students and an A for graduating students. Therefore, it is one indicator. It is when you combine the two things together, 50% of a school can be an A if the students graduate on time. When we looked at it, it's also aligned with the values that this department has expressed around the need to acknowledge the change in the entry point for work, the need to make sure that young people leave with a credential in hand, which currently the formula, whether we like the word incentive or not, it's not incentivizing, and it's not really measuring that well, because anything above 100 is how you're incentivizing getting credentials for young people, and that the current index goes all the way up to 160. And 60 points has not resulted in a ton more students getting associate's degrees. It's not resulted in a ton more students earning AP credits, all of those, the advanced credentials, et cetera, because right now, a school can be an A as a high school because of its graduation rate for the most part.
It started in 2019. In 2019, that's the only set of data you have. In the next 2 years was COVID. So you have yet to see anything happen from anything. You don't have any data. All you have, are you saying all that based on 2019 scores? You only have one year's worth of data. So how can you make those assumptions like that to say, yeah, you're only looking at 2019? Help me understand why you want to make a whole change on a system that we have yet to even see bloom. We haven't yet to see anything happen. You only have one year's worth of results.
I'm happy to sit down with any districts that have some leading data that can tell me that we're moving toward a larger number of students receiving those advanced credentials. So feel free to reach out. We can sit down and look at your data together. My guess would be that that's probably not going to be the case, but if you've got something that's really insightful for me, I'd love to take a look at it. But again, this is a conversation that we are open to continuing to have. The work group has been very specific with us that they want lots of engagement and feedback. And I literally talked through the components of what we're hearing and included some of the things that you said, and we need to look at it. And the perspectives vary on both sides.
So for me, my kids will never get to the point with the changes that you would like to make in the strength of diploma. We'll never get IB. We'll never get there because we can't afford it. We can't afford, this is literally about the haves and the have-nots. The ones that have it, they're gonna be fine. The ones that don't or struggle to make it happen, we won't be.
So is the limiting factor for you the resources to pay for the IB courses, or the resources to pay for the dual enrollment, or the resources to pay for the AP, or the advanced or the basic credentials? Is that the limiting factor for you? Is it money to pay for those credentials?
Do you not think that that's a limiting factor?
I'm just asking.
That there's an access and opportunity gap. Mm-hmm. Access and opportunity leads to an achievement gap. And you know what? Why don't you come to St. Helena? I invite you to come to my district so you can see all of the hard work that we're putting in and the things that we've done over the years to try to get to the point where we are. And with this accountability system, clearly is not for systems like my district because it masks the fact that we grow every year and that we do things for our kids every single year. But this accountability system does not allow that work to be reflected. And now here you come with the strength of diploma. So in other words, you want to change up the entire high school. You might as well just say we don't have high schools anymore. Because my kid getting a high school diploma, that's big for a lot of our kids. And isn't that the point of high school? That you get a high school diploma? But now what you're saying is, no, it's not enough. Now they need to get all these other credentials. Things that I know that from year to year we cannot afford. So you tell me, what am I supposed to do in a situation like that?
Yeah, I've got two things. One critical item that's on here is, as we seek feedback, we want to understand what resources, it's on there somewhere.
And please know, I'm not making excuses because in St. Helena, we make a way out of no way. And we really do push. And we have our teachers and all our administrators board on down that care and want to do. And we push and we fight and we make a way out of no way. We're making a way even with this accountability system that has really strangled us. And we're still moving forward. But what you want to do is like every time we take 2 steps forward, we take 4 steps back, not because of anything that we're doing, it's because of the unfair playing field that you are creating by people with singular lenses looking at trying to understand a complex situation. They have no idea how the impact of the things that they want to have happen impact schools at the local level. They have no idea, and they don't know our children.
Yeah, I think that the one thing that I would say is when this was built, and if you go back and look at the slides from the last work group meeting, there's a high school table that shows how points could be allocated. And if a school gets a student to a 21 on the ACT, gets them to mastery on the end of course test, they graduate, and they don't earn a credential, the school would still earn an A on that index, or on that overall school performance score for that student, regardless of whether the student took AP or IB. It's built around this idea that you don't, like, if a student is ready to exit high school, going and doing the next thing, right? They are college ready. They have a 21 on the ACT, they achieve mastery on the end of course test. The credential is actually, you can earn a 0 for that credential and still earn an A for your work with that young person. So like it's actually built with that in mind. If you go and look at that, I'm happy to sit down and work on running numbers with you. But it is built around making sure that high school can be high school, and if kids are ready and prepared for the next thing, which if a student isn't at the college and career readiness standard on that ACT, what else are they leaving high school with beyond that high school diploma?
But I would love to I'd like for you to come and sit down with me so I could talk to you about how the point structure within that accountability system is off. So when you make these changes, you need to also, and I don't want to go in the weeds with everything, but you really need to sit down with me so I can go over with you how those things are really impacting. When we talk about the 21, when we talk about what really makes it 8. Because I was making the same argument back in 2019 before the State Department made the decision to submit that, I think we all were, when they made the decision to submit that proposal to the feds. So we all, superintendents, we all had concerns at that time and they were not addressed. We all have concerns this time and we're hoping that all of our concerns will be addressed.
So before then, I want to just, to Dr. Joseph's point, you said, like Thomas, you said this about ACT scores. You said he did, but in fact, ACT says that. You know, ACT is the one that says this is the college readiness number. It wasn't Thomas Lambert. Thomas Lambert was just saying what ACT says.
Oh, I completely understand that.
So it's not Thomas saying that. It's what he is saying what ACT said. And on the high school piece, like you can blame me for the fact that I think that our high schools need to shift. I mean, I don't know that for an overwhelming number of our kids, simply leaving and exiting high school with a high school diploma alone is satisfactory. You know, we believe, maybe wrongfully so, but we believe that a certain percentage of children should be exiting with a high wage credential or an apprenticeship or a set of college courses that lead to a 2-year or 4-year degree. And I thought collectively that's what we felt to be true. And that we should not be focused on the high school diploma alone. Now I understand not every student would potentially get those additional sets of skills, but that is what preparation for workforce beyond high school or preparation for college beyond high school looks like. So, I mean, I'll take blame on saying high schools need to shift because I believe that. I don't think we can continue to operate the same way in our high school.
I agree. And I do believe I want every single one of my kids to graduate with an associate's degree. And we're pushing really hard to make that happen. Even with all of the circumstances that we have to face that are beyond our control, I do believe in having all kids be prepared for the next level, whatever it may be. However, I do believe that we need to take a harder look at how you will judge us when we make those things happen.
This is, if you could, everyone, for the sake of order, I know there's quite a few people who have comments, and I want to make sure that the meeting runs in an orderly manner, so please make sure you're acknowledged before you start speaking, because we may have people speaking out of order. So I think Superintendent Powell is asked to be acknowledged, and then we'll come to you, Superintendent Downing.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, and thank you, Dr. Joseph, for your comments. I will kind of start with the same word she started with, the words do matter, and I think, Dr. Brumley, the way you started kind of helped set a little bit of a different tone, because I do recall the last SAC meeting I came to, the expectation was there's this Bessie work group that's going to bring some, what I understood to be recommendations to the June board meeting that I believe was actually stated to impact us potentially even for this upcoming school year. Now, my understanding based on what you just said and some other conversations is that's not necessarily the case, that there are now, these are discussions, and this is our opportunity to bring questions. So, I guess my biggest concern, and I think a lot of concern, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but would be alleviated if the process that was being undertaken right now by a select group of Bessie board members was more in alignment with what I believe the feds specify in their regulations, meaning that there should be stakeholder engagement in this process, and what Louisiana Revised Statute 1710.1 says, that it is a collaborative effort when we start talking about school accountability. So I think that's the piece that there's a lot of concern around. I don't know what that means.
Please, Johnson Control, we'll be working on file system today. Please, Mr. Lord, you also further notes. Johnson Control, we'll work on file system
I'm not betting Dr. Chesson to put me on the time limit. So I just want to say it does meet better.
Dr. Superintendent Powell, for the sake of order, when we hear that alarm, we'll follow.
That was, that alarm, that was Mr. Foltz trying to add a little comment.
Right. So understanding that these are ongoing discussions helps me feel a little bit better about it. I think once superintendents feel like they're actually at the table as part of these discussions, it would make a lot of us feel a little bit better knowing that there's a true collaboration about this, and not just something that some group is putting together. There's going to be something put out there for public comment, like we want to be part of the conversation. Many of us in the room accept the fact that there needs to be some changes in accountability. When you asked a very pointed question, Mr. Lambert, about are 69% of the schools safe? Well, yes, they are, according to our current accountability system. Now, do we want to have a deep conversation about are those inflated if we're really talking about student academic experience? Yeah, let's have that conversation. But that's the whole point. Let's have the conversation. You got an educated group of folks here that believe in children and believe in the teachers who touch their lives every single day. We just want to be part of that conversation. And right now, there is at least a perception that some very high level of conversations are being had without any input from the people who work closest to children. And so I think as soon as that is dealt with, there will be a little bit less consternation around this. Let's have a real conversation about student achievement. Let's have a real, and we're on a 2025 plan right now. So this, push to hurry up and get something done is where I think a lot of us were kind of breath was taken away with it. Now, last year, the recommendations that I think the actual accountability commission brought forth, a lot of us were behind a lot of that stuff. And so I think if what was said at the outset of this is the true situation, that there's going to be broader conversation and we're going to be brought to the table as well as other stakeholders, then I think it would make a little bit more sense. And Tom, I know you're in between all of it, so you have to hear from it. But you're having to meet with individual superintendents or small groups of superintendents because we're not at the table with the other conversations. And so as soon as that happens, I think a lot of questions could be answered in a meaningful and productive way. Because I don't think we're all completely far off from each other with what we think could be done. We just got to have an opportunity at the table.
Superintendent Downing.
Well, just to a couple points that were made. This is a huge, dramatic shift in the high school experience, and it's happening awful dang fast. And I think that there are a lot of unintended consequences out there that could potentially be the result of this. And anytime I do something fast, it usually turns into a problem. I think there's a lot of points that have been made here that are well taken. we've always worked to get students college and career ready. Now we're being told they're not, even when they meet the criteria that we've all been operating under for so long. So if that criteria needs to change, it needs to be done in a slower manner. The only other thing I would add, we're still dealing with COVID, we're still dealing with teacher shortages, behavior with students that's become extreme, even in outside of special education, regular education students. To do all of this now at this pace, I mean, some of us have only been made aware of this in the last 6 to 8 weeks. And to be traveling at this speed with everything else we're trying to juggle right now, it is just, to me, it's unreasonable.
What speed should it happen at? At what point should we, it's a serious question, as we think about what cohort should this apply to, all of those things, at what speed should we expect the expectation to be exiting high school with a credential, whether basic or advanced, associates for full credit, advanced plus for 125 points or 160 points, whatever the top winds up being?
I think after a thorough, thoughtful conversation with education experts that are involved in discussion from the outset, as opposed to, somewhere down the road, if we're going to change what high school is, we need to change high school and call it something else, because what students are going to have to do to achieve these suggested recommendations or the things that I've seen that may not all be accurate, they're not going to be able to have a high school experience as they now know it. They are going to enter a community college or junior college type setup their junior year. And the things that we're doing now that that the community rally around are all going to be impacted. And so in order if that's the route that we want to go as a collective body, I think you do those things slowly and make sure that you consider all the unintended consequences. There are groups that haven't even been discussed here, the average and below average students. How are we going to access them and give them opportunities that are different from what they currently have?
I can answer that question.
We'll have comments from Superintendent Watts, then from study group member Morris, then Superintendent Jenkins, then Superintendent Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a couple of thoughts. One, I still think the high school diploma means something. But just a couple of things maybe to consider. I would say this. I agree that our elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools, there's a difference in the way those scores look, right? Mostly because elementary schools it's pretty much your assessment scores. But the question I would have would be, do our elementary schools and our middle schools have an impact on the performance of students in high school? And do they have a part to play in them graduating high school? I say yes, and we share that with our teachers every year. One of the reasons we take our high school graduates each year and march them through our elementary schools is so my second grade teacher recognizes the work that she's done and the impact that's had. That being said, maybe the graduation piece then needs to be reflected in the elementary school. I know that may be out of the box, kind of crazy. It was just a thought, because they do impact that. They have a part to play, right? And then secondly, I think, what has the biggest impact on student achievement? What factor has the biggest impact on student achievement? It's the teacher. And I think, while I understand the value of the accountability system, I think if we're going to recruit the best and the brightest to put in front of our kids, we really need to consider how this impacts that. Is this something that's helping us bring the best and brightest into the education field? Thanks.
Yes, Member Morris.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm trying to be, first of all, trying to be a good listener here, so we've no comments so far, but certainly appreciate all the comments and the dialogue. It's very constructive and it's very much appreciated as a member of the work group. So at this point, just wanted to briefly speak to a couple things I've heard, and that's basically pace and participation. So with regard to pace, just want to be clear that the June meeting, June message, the work group engagement at June message is an update. That's the way I perceive it, as an update. And then after the group has considered stakeholder input, then we come back in August with potential recommendations for further discussion with stakeholders in attendance. Then with regard to participation, I just want to share, representing my district, I've given an opportunity for every superintendent in my district to meet with me one-on-one, and anybody they want to bring and have the accountability conversation. And I've met 2 or 3 times with that group. I've also asked the work group to provide a formal process for stakeholder engagement to the Wednesday meeting. So my expectation is at the Wednesday meeting that formal process for stakeholder engagement will be presented, and everybody will have an opportunity to provide their input similar to what's been expressed today. So I don't know whether there be any reason for concern about lack of stakeholder input. I fully expect there will be a formal process giving everyone an opportunity to engage. Thank you, sir.
Superintendent Jenkins?
Yes, thank you. Superintendent Brown, Mr. Lambert. I think we start off with what we can agree on. This is a complicated issue, right? And so, time is not our ally. And so we need to be able to look at things and do them at the appropriate pacing and appropriate timing as well. So when we look at, in Louisiana, educating children, and we look at how we compare ourselves to others in the country, I think about 2 variables. There are many, but I think about 2 variables. And the one big variable I think about are people. And everybody talks about people in a different way, whether you're talking about children, we're talking about adults in the classroom, or other. But, how we fund education is the other variable as well. And we don't do such a good job of doing that in Louisiana. But when we do fund, as Dr. Joseph indicated earlier, that does create some have and have-nots, because there are some districts that can do exceptionally well in funding education in their communities through ad valorem taxes, where there are others that struggle in providing those same types of services and funding to them. Again, just looking at those 2 components. So when we're looking at our needs, we talk about the 21. I've heard that repeated many, many times, and we're talking about the ACT and other components of the accountability. But I think we also look at what are our needs in this state, what are our needs in this country, and I'm talking about specifically in terms of workforce, because we tend to talk about workforce a lot, and educating children. I think those are 2 different issues. But when we look at what are our needs, what are we really educating our kids to become? Yes, we don't need any more lawyers. I'm sorry for the lawyers in the group. But we do need a ton of teachers right now. We need a ton of electricians and plumbers and all of these other fields that are in career and technical education. And so do we necessarily need 21 to do those things? Just a thought, I'm just making some conversations. Another thing that you mentioned was that 69% AB schools, AB high schools. I guess my question to you would be is, what should they be? If we're at 69 now, what should it be based upon the data that you may have at hand? And then, as I come to a close, I can talk a lot, so I'm going to keep it short, is that ultimately, what is our goal in determining the accountability? I think at some point we have to start off with our thesis statement and start off, what is the goal? What are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to have less AD schools? Because we followed the rules and we played the game based upon the rules that we know and we achieved. But we can't be penalized for achieving. So we need to be able to find, what is the goal? Is it to have less A and B schools? And if that is the goal, then tell me what the rules are so that we can be, more proficient, and then give us enough time to be able to understand the rules, be able to implement the rules, be able to adjust to them, and then so that we can move forward and be successful again. Because we've been doing this for a number of years now, over. As soon as we get to a mark, let's change the rules. We get to another mark, change the rules. We get to another mark, we change the rules. And so we need to be able to understand what the rules are. And then, lastly, when we talk about these complicated issues, it's not always about data. We sometimes forget people altogether. Data is critically important to be able to adjust things and be able to have some type of benchmarks and measures. But you also have to look at the people component of it. And so I think Mr. Dowling talked about the lack of teachers that we have right now in the state of Louisiana, or the shortage that we have. That's the impact. Dr. Joseph and others talked about COVID that we've been going through for at least 2 years. That's real. And so to be making changes now at this point in time, it's not about slowing down or speeding up. Because sometimes when we're, if you're coming through St. Landry Parish and you're going through Cross Springs, you better do 45. All right, the speed limit makes a difference. Not 46, 45. And so you need to be able to think about, the appropriate pacing at the appropriate time. And then so we just need to look at, are we going too fast and asking too much? Listen, we want our kids to be able to compete, and not be able to compete. They are competing with anyone in the country right now. And so sometimes data can say anything you want it to. It really can. And so we just want to be able to look at those components and have a real rigorous discussion like we're having today, but just look at the pacing and the timing of it. And I think it makes all the difference in the world. Thank you.
We'll have comments from Superintendent Joseph, then Superintendent Brookhouse. As a friendly reminder, if you'd like to submit a public comment card, please do so your thoughts can be heard. And then we'll come back to Superintendent Lockley. Superintendent Joseph.
Thank you. I want to just point out again that words do matter. Words matter. So when we talk about we want to create a fair playing field, we want to be more equitable, the other side always uses the term water down. Do you want to water down? No, we do not want to water down anything. We all believe that high standards is very important, but we also believe that it should be done in an equitable manner. It should be done in a fair manner. So the term water down is an unfair term to use when we talk about wanting to improve the outcomes for all of our children. Also, I think we need to go back and look at that ESSA plan again and see why the high school percentages are the way they are. Are there some requirements that were a part of ESSA that made it that way? And then my question, if the feds told you no to the humanities test, do you think, how are they going to address you wanting to change accountability, the whole accountability structure? That to me is, an interesting thing there. I'm wondering if they would even approve the changes that you are wanting to make when they said no to just the humanities test. So, and then ACT average, did anybody look at what is the average for our black and brown learners?
When we were talking about the ACT average, it wasn't the average in the state, it was the state, or the...
But nation, I know.
Yeah, but that wasn't specific to a particular student, it was the college readiness standard is what that number was, not subgroup based.
And did you look at what it is for black and brown students? That's the thing, it's lower than the 21. And then the question that you asked this gentleman about the pace. Well, how slow do you want to go? By 2025? Because that is when we're supposed to get mastery by 2025. It started in 2018-19, and it's supposed to be reviewed at 2025. That's when. Because right now, you only still have one set of data, and that's from 2019.
So freshman cohort 2025?
2025.
And there was a question at the beginning that I lost that you asked. I'm trying to remember what it was. I was going to respond to both of them. There was the ACT question.
Yes, sir.
Oh, ESSA plan. The feds are totally fine with updating ESSA plans. We meet with them about every 2 weeks to talk about a variety of issues related to our ESSA plan, changes, adjustments, all of those different types of things. The specific feedback on the humanities was the IADA, the regulations from the feds actually specifically prohibit that activity. So for example, we sit and talk with them about if we were to if we were to implement the strength of the diploma proposal, what concerns would you all have when we brought that? And they start to like engage and have a conversation and go do some research and come back to us and they'll say, oh, this state does that. Oh, that state does that, to give us some perspective. So they will not have a problem with amending an ESSA plan. That's a pretty standard course. States do it all the time.
Superintendent Brockhouse?
So I've watched accountability over a lot of years, and if we listed changes over those years, it would take poster board after poster board after poster board, right? I have to believe that in the very first one, we wanted to graduate successful, intelligent students. So I don't think that's changed. I think we've always wanted to do that, right? I mean, to insinuate that we weren't wanting to do that then, and we don't want to do it this year, but we want to do it next year, that's not true. I think through all of this, we wanted to do that. The value of high school that he mentioned right there. High school is about a lot of stuff. It's about being in the band and playing football and going to band club and student council. And I'm really, really worried that we're taking, in an effort to make an academically intelligent child, we're losing the value of a social and emotionally intelligent child in some cases. And I think 10 years from now, we're going to all look back and we're going to say, man, we shouldn't have put a 16-year-old on a college campus. Yet, that's the only way we're going to be able to get points. So we had to do it. And I think when we look back, we're going to look at this and say, did that kid 10 years later perform any better in their job environment, in their success rate, in their salary? I would bet you when we look back 20 years from now, maybe not. Because they didn't have the social and emotional intelligence, they didn't have the maturity when they started their job. And I'm worried that we're losing that value trying to grab points because the system is set up to make us do that. And if we don't, so I mean, it just can't be all about that.
That will be tough to follow up, Superintendent Validity.
I'm not sure I want to. But our thinking is that if we really care about feedback, then we're having it at a time when we have least access to parents, to teachers, and then it has to be ready for recommendation by August. The summer is the least amount of time when we have access to those people.
Superintendent O'Shea?
Okay, and following Carl is, and I just want to say I am not a member of the Bessie work group, so I don't have all of that knowledge that they've been working with over the last few months. But I think Jeff's point was well taken in terms of the lack of superintendent representation and the timing of it. This is a major shift in accountability for our state and for our schools. The people who should be the most knowledgeable are the lead educators in this state. These are the people sitting around this table right here. These are the people who are responsible for that educational advancement. Yet significant, not just to give feedback. There shouldn't just be opportunities for superintendents to give feedback. It should have been in the actual development of changes. So I felt compelled to say that. I don't think giving feedback from us is sufficient. I've heard things in the background about, well, we've got to make grades reflect, and I'm just going to use the term the old bell curve. Well, as long as we have as many F's as A's and D's as B's and then mostly C's, we're doing pretty good. Well, to me, that goes against, because when we look at these simulations and we're looking at maybe the elementary and middle reflecting a little bit more of that, not the true curve, but a little bit more of that. And we're looking at taking high schools to make them more reflective of what that curve looks like. To me, we're trying to develop something that approximates those results. And I've heard a couple of people say that's what they would like to see. A couple of people who have decision-making power. And I think that's wrong. If we have more of a criterion reference setup, what we're saying is every child should attain mastery. Every child should get this. We're supposed to be working toward this, as Thomas mentioned a little bit, if you got a 21 and you scored a mastery and you did this, you'd be an A. Well, if God came down one day, the day we took all these tests, and that happened, then I would venture to say, instead of all of us scoring A's, we try to divide the system to differentiate and make sure we had more of a well-rounded curve. And that should not be the focus of what we're looking at. And I'm not saying that definitely is. But what I'm saying is high school, and Carl said it well, is different from elementary and middle. Our goals when we get a child, 14, 15, 16, after they've been through K to 8, should be a different set of goals. We're working all the time from pre-K on up to make that happen. But then the high schools pull in a 9th grade class that looks a certain way. So what goals do we need to be successful for those young people in life? And I'm not sure that's the way we're looking at it. We've talked around this table a lot about the Leap 2025, the 6 tests that we're talking about that weigh heavily, and many of us don't see a true value in keeping those and putting so much weight on those, because by that time we don't feel that that is the most effective use of our time and the kids' time in terms of getting them ready for graduation and life after. Have we seriously then taken a look at changing that dynamic if we're going to change the whole thing? Or if we're going to look at the whole thing a little bit differently? Either a de-emphasis on that, a cutting of some of those, or do we need that? And how does that fit in relation to the ACT? And I'm not going to get into the weeds of these things, but just overall concept, if we're going to look at it, we had asked to look at those, many of us, to look at those LEAP 2025 assessments, and do we need them? And do we need them in the way that it counts? Even this growth piece, going from 8th to 10th grade, how much do you go from 8th grade math, the end of Algebra 1, and then have some kind of a scale score where algebra and geometry are related? You're still going to have somebody convince me that that is a valid progression on these scale scores. But anyway, the big issue as well is we're looking at kids that are not going to achieve at those levels. Special ed kids, English language learners. Our legislature has passed legislation that basically says a SPED kid doesn't have to pass any of these assessments to graduate. But there's no current legislation or acknowledgement within the department then that maybe we should look at what their goals are for progress and graduation a little bit differently. Do we truly expect the kid with a 60 IQ because those are our formerly Lot 2 kids that are accessing now the general curriculum on a regular path. Do we truly expect kids with 60 IQs to get a 21 on the ACT, to score a mastery, and even if they're in a Jump Start pathway, to be able to take the test for the advanced credentials? No, that's not going to happen. So they'll get a diploma. But in all of the other indicators, we've got significant issues. So what are realistic goals for different groups of kids within our accountability? I mean, these are some of the things we should be maybe exploring. I mean, the legislature set TOPS Tech at a 17. Well, the initial proposal totally devalues that in the ACT index. And I'm not sure, I mean, is that good, is that bad? I don't know. I mean, I have my own opinions on that. But when we are doing that, when we are looking at these things, why aren't we talking about some of this? And how do we address goals for kids that are starting at the 9th grade level at a certain spot, that are never going to get the 21 on the ACT, that are never going to get the mastery on the ELA and math, LEAP tests that we're going to give? What are we going to do that give these kids a meaningful high school experience? And those kids, and I'll tell you, I've been pushing in my district now the dual enrollment, and let's get you on board with the fast forward and the associate degree big time. And I'm talking to my high school kids right now. And I'm getting some of those revved up maybe in the academic pathway, the TOPS University pathway. But these are my kids who want to be in the band, and they want to play ball, and they want to be in the school play, and they want to be on campus at the high school to be class officers, to lead their groups. So the only way I can accomplish both is try to get some of these classes taught on the high school campus, rather than going to make them sit somewhere else. That requires us to get our teachers certified to teach these classes, and a whole lot of other things as well. Now, why isn't accountability taking any of this into consideration if we're looking at a major overhaul? If we're looking at a few tweaks, that's one thing. We've been tweaking this thing since, I don't know, I've been in education 50 years, and we've been tweaking every year in a different form of what we're looking at. But if we're looking at an overhaul, if we're looking at making major changes, and we don't consider any of these things, then what have we really done?
Superintendent Chapter.
Now, they talked about having to follow Carl, but having to follow Bessie and Superintendent Boche is pretty tough as well. Before I begin with any comments, I think it's important that I publicly state that I believe in and value accountability. I believe it's something that our state needs to have, and it's something that I would never suggest getting away from. However, I think there are several things that we should consider. Number one, we have had 2 meetings of the Future of LEAP Assessment Committee. We've actually just started our work. Dr. Gray and I are serving on that committee with a couple of other superintendents. And if that work is to have any value, why are we rushing to create an accountability system at the same time that we are reconsidering how we're even going to assess the students of Louisiana? Number 2, K-2 is going to be in a study or pilot year. Dr. Brumley rallied the troops. He allowed us to participate in decision-making around K-2 accountability. It was brought to the Bessie board, and it was not even discussed. There was a motion to not discuss it, to scrap it all, and then to create this commission that is now working on it. When the superintendent was trying to make changes, the board told him, stop. I believe in the K-2 so much that my district is working through all of the piloting of that system. Why are we going to create a new system that's going to start in August? Now in March, we were told it would be in June. And now here we're being told it's going to come in August. But why would we create a brand new accountability system and then later bring in K-2? Why can we not do that all at the same time? It makes so much more sense that if the state is going to have a comprehensive accountability system, that K-2 is included, and they create the comprehensive system at one time. Thomas asked Superintendent Downey a question. What is the right pace? Well, according to statute, the state board should be in consultation with parents, teachers, school administrators, and other education stakeholders in the development of a letter grade system, not ask us for feedback after the fact. And we as superintendents, principals, educators have not been included in the conversation. And when we do try to have a conversation, we get things like, well, our decision is sort of already made. At least that's the conversations and the point that I get whenever we do have the conversation. And credit to Thomas, he has been talking about this a lot. But I think listening and hearing are very different. And I think people are listening, but they're not hearing what the people who have to live with this accountability are really saying. For the last 6 years as a school superintendent, I have pushed to ensure that every one of my graduates have a diploma in one hand and something else in the other, because that is what Louisiana has told us is what makes a quality graduate. And then to be told that we're playing the game is sort of an insult. What we are doing is doing exactly what Louisiana's accountability system has told us we should do when our students are graduating. So yes, it does need to slow down, and to tell you exactly when, I'll reiterate what Dr. Joseph said. LEAP 2025. That's how the system was created. Why do we have to do this in 2022? When the system was created for us to achieve something by 2025, and we haven't even gotten there, and in the midst of implementing a new accountability system, we face COVID and storms like never before. If we are going to truly create an accountability system that values high school, we have to look at what we're administering to our students. Right now, the changes say that by the end of the 10th grade year, we know if a kid is going to graduate or not, because that's when all of the LEAP 2025 assessments have already been administered. But if we're going to really value the ACT, we have to consider the formatting for LEAP 2025, because the format for that and ACT are totally different. And so it puts teachers in a predicament. How do I actually prepare my students? Which format do I actually use when I'm preparing my students? And if the state is going to really value the ACT, then we really need to consider the future of LEAP 2025 in an innovative and different way, which is why I understand the state has created this future of LEAP assessment committee that has only had 2 meetings. The other thing that I have heard is double weighting of high school graduation. Have you looked at what ELPT does for a system and the harm that ELPT can have on a system, which is receiving lots, probably far too much? So that is definitely something that should also be considered. When we talk about simulated data, we as a school system have not received any simulated data from the Louisiana Department of Education. Thanks to Wendy and Dr. Pope, we've received simulated data. And my high schools, like all of your high schools who have A's in strength of diploma, will automatically drop to D's with the new format. You said that this is the way that we are judging our students. So how in one broad stroke do we say that what we have been doing since 2019 now is not effective and we're not creating quality graduates in our high schools? Something that definitely needs to be considered. As educators, we are rule followers. We are not we're not about gaming a system. What we have done is we have become very good at making sure that our students are graduating in a way that Bessie and the Louisiana Department of Education say that we should be graduating our students. It's just a total insult to be told that you're gaming or playing a system. And I think, as Dr. Joseph said, words matter. And so I think everyone should be considerate about the words. The final comment that I have is I am very fortunate as superintendent to have a very wealthy school system. However, we don't have international baccalaureate. We don't have interest. But what we do have is lots of internships. We're creating AWS Level 3 welders. We're creating students who are graduating, ready to go to college and or to their career. And I think that school systems should receive that value. We should not have many colleges on our high school campuses. And I think that LDOE and Bessie needs to really consider that as they're moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Jafriano. Questions or comments from any other council members?
I just have one more question. Who created that strength of diploma chart that you shared?
Me, working with others that work here at the department. I've engaged with some superintendents, some people that run high schools, talked to them about what are their credentials, what are they valued at. I've engaged with folks that actually work in the credentialing field and talked to them about are our credentials that are all basic, actually all basic? Are all the advanced credentials all advanced? Is there a need for a middle category? Also, we've looked at other states and the way that they measure this index. We're the only state that I know that calls it a strength of diploma index. Florida and Mississippi call it a college and career acceleration index. And theirs is actually much more blunt. It is no credit if a student graduates with a diploma, and then it's full credit if students get certain credentials. So there's not as much gradation. There's nothing above the 100 mark.
We'll have a comment from Bessie Member Morris, and then we'll have our public comment card that's been created.
Thank you, Mr. President. So just wanted to again thank everyone here today for your comments. They're sincerely appreciated. But I agree, with a lot of things that I heard personally. Number one, or one of the things I agree with is that words do matter. And so I wanted to clarify one word. I think that I used earlier was feedback and versus input. We're talking about a process here, and I'm not defending a perfect process by any means. But I do want to be clear that part of the process is for stakeholder input. There will be a formal process for stakeholder input discussed at the meeting on Wednesday, so I want to be clear about that. And that stakeholder input is not just feedback, okay? It's input into the process. So I just want to be clear about that. And then also, along the same lines, no decisions have been made yet. No recommendations have even been made yet. So I want to be clear about that as well, because that won't be done until we get stakeholder input from all parties that are interested. And then the last comment I had, just again at a very high level, is with regard to pace and all the challenges that everyone in this room, as well as your team, have had over the last couple of years, with regard to pace and making changes, given all those challenges. With everything that's going on, the pace, a lot of it's determined by technology, right? A lot of really good conversation here about technology, what's available today, how can we best use it for the benefit of our students and our staff. But everyone that I've discuss this accountability system with across the country, feedback I get is that, it's organic, it's growing, it's always going to be changing. And it's going to, the pace of that change is going to be driven by technology, what technology makes possible. And so in my mind, the paradigm that we're in right now is that we should be expecting change. And how can we best take advantage of the technology that's available to create opportunities for our students? So I just wanted to really throw that out there again at a very high level. I think technology is what's driving a lot of this. It's challenging for all of us to keep up with the technology. Just the cell phones, much less everything on top of that, right? So just ask you to keep that in mind and then look forward to the level of engagement going forward. Thank you, Mr. President.
We have public comments from Dr. Wendy Baudouin with Louisiana School Boards Association.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Wendy Baudouin, Louisiana School Boards Association. I want to start out by saying that we have not had a single school board member ever express a lack of desire for accountability in their school systems. They want to be held accountable. They fully supported the K-2 accountability measures, and they are overwhelmingly, by survey every year, interested in changes to the accountability system. Not removing accountability, but to changes in the accountability system so that the school system's scores accurately reflect the reality of what's happening in their school systems. I'm going to say a few things. A lot of the points about the shortcomings of the proposals that aren't being called proposals today have been mentioned, but I want to just point out a couple of things. So for our members, the general consensus is that there's two ways to talk about an accountability system. The first is that you decide what you want your end results to be, and you structure your system in a way that guarantees those results. The second way is to decide what your priorities and your goals are as an educational system, and then you create your system to meet those educational priorities and goals, and the results are what the results are. So when I hear questions like, is it too many schools to have 69% and an A? The answer is not based on the system that we have. We designed the system to measure the things that we thought were important at the time, which brings up a great point. The accountability system is a reflection of what the rules are at the time, not necessarily a reflection of the quality of educational outcomes in a school. There's no greater evidence of that than the recent data simulations the department produced relating to some of these proposals. You look at the 2019 data in strength of diploma alone, and you identify the schools and their performance, and you run simulations changing the formula, nothing about student learning has changed. Nothing about student outcomes have changed, and yet the majority of schools who were successful in strength of diploma become D or F in that particular indicator. And yet we haven't changed learning at all. So when we talk about accountability, we should be keeping in mind that the system reflects the rules and not necessarily the quality of outcomes that are happening on campuses. A few things to point out about some of those proposals are that according to the strength of diploma, the index almost exclusively focuses on courses and not on skills, which are a key element of college and career readiness. We seem to be married to the idea of strength of diploma as opposed to looking at what some other states do, which is college and career readiness indicators, which focus significantly on skills. Skills that in Louisiana our legislature has prioritized, like community service, biliteracy, STEM. There are other avenues to identifying how successful students are going to be and employable they're going to be after high school that are not solely tied to courses. The other issue is that in accountability, all of our systems should provide alignment. So for every opportunity for a student to earn points in a school, there should be an equal opportunity for a student not on that same pathway to earn those points. In current proposals, there haven't been any discussions about how we're going to measure the positive outcomes of our students who qualify under the April Dunn Act, for example. There's also growth conversations. Growth conversations are tied exclusively to the assessment that we are utilizing, and there have been concerns, even in the Bessie work group, about those assessments not adequately measuring students who are academically behind. Right? So having growth conversations in the absence of having an assessment conversation is faulty logic. And finally, I want to talk about the process. So there hasn't particularly been a lot of stakeholder feedback in terms of developing some of these proposals. And as someone who works in an association, I can tell you that our school board members have a number of ideas about proposals they'd like to see in accountability. I'm sure superintendents have a number of proposals that they'd like to see in accountability. And when we see things like slides that have points assigned and values, the perception to us as stakeholders is that we are supposed to respond to what's being presented, not that we are being asked to develop alternative methods. And with a 2-month timeline for gathering stakeholder feedback and a process that has taken more than 6 months to even get to this point as a non-proposal, 2 months doesn't feel like a significant amount of time to have stakeholders provide input that could change the proposal that might go to Bessie in August. So I will leave this by saying that there's a lot of focus on high school inflation, but there haven't been equal conversations about things in the system that are also unbalanced, like deflation, like how the Department of Education assigns a 0 to every student who doesn't participate in the test. That's a deflation of our assessment index. But we're not having those conversations. So if we want to have a conversation about the entire accountability system, everything should be on the table. Everyone's voice should have equal access at the table. And most importantly, we should be focusing on a system that maximizes student potential and isn't seeking to maximize points.
Thanks. Just to add some clarity to that, I've reached out to LSBA twice to meet to discuss this. And have not heard back.
Not active. Sorry. Dr. Crumley will have a conversation about that later.
Dr. Baldwin, thank you for your comments. Superintendent Bromley. Mr. Lambert, is there anything else you'd like to share?
Always happy to engage, shoot me a note, we'll get together. I try to be as available as possible, so let me know and we'll get together.
Whether we agree or whether we disagree, I think we have had a conversation. And I look forward to the next one. We have a motion on the table to receive. All in favor, aye? Aye. Those opposed, nay?
Nay.
Motion carries. Superintendent Brumley, there is a final slide. In closing, our next meeting of the Superintendent's Advisory Council will be held on July 28, 2022. I'd also like to recognize our council members that will be retiring over the summer. If I'm not mistaken, Superintendent Brookhouse will be retiring. Superintendent Locklear. Superintendent Watts. Superintendent Lewis, who's not present today. Prayerfully, those of you who have contract renewals will not be retiring as a result of some lack of direction on your part. So I hope everyone has a great summer. Superintendent Brown, is there anything you'd like to say to close this out?
Thank you for this brief meeting today. I look forward to seeing everyone next week, teacher leader. I think most people here are registered, so we have over 5,000 teachers coming in, so I'm really excited about that. And apologies that I have to leave the room now and go to another meeting because this was such a brief meeting.
Meeting adjourned.
We would like to thank the retiring superintendents for their service.